A woman stumbles across the Montana grasslands carrying nothing but a cast iron skillet and secrets that could destroy her. When ranch boss Cal Braddock finds her collapsed at his fence line, she refuses to give her name, her past, or any reason to trust her. She offers only 3 words. I can cook. He should turn her away. Strangers bring trouble, and this one has danger written in every flinch, every hidden scar, every moment she won't meet his eyes. But something in her desperation mirrors his own buried grief, and against all reason, he lets her stay. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lena's story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll discover whether a woman running from her past can ever truly find home. The Montana sky stretched endless and indifferent, the kind of blue that made a person feel small. Lena Hawthorne had been feeling small for months now, but today she felt something worse, invisible. Her legs trembled with each step through the tall grass, her vision swimming at the edges. The cast iron skillet clutched against her chest had become impossibly heavy, though it weighed no more than it had when her mother first taught her to season it properly, back when the world still made sense. 3 days since her last real meal. 2 since she'd finished the water in her canteen. 1 since she'd seriously considered whether dying on these plains might be easier than whatever came next. The fence line appeared like a mirage through the heat shimmer, rough-cut posts connected by taut wire, stretching in both directions toward horizons she couldn't see. Beyond it, buildings. A ranch house, barn, outbuildings that meant people, food, possibility. Or danger. Possibly both. Lena's foot caught on a stone hidden in the grass. She stumbled, went down hard on one knee, and the skillet slipped from her grip, hitting the ground with a dull thud that seemed to echo across the emptiness. For a long moment she stayed there, kneeling in the dirt like a penitent, staring at the only thing she had left of her mother, her old life, her lost daughter. The name etched inside the skillet's handle was so worn she could barely read it anymore, but she didn't need to see it. She'd traced those letters 10,000 times. Sarah. Ma'am? The voice came from somewhere above and behind her. Lena's body reacted before her mind could. She flinched hard, one arm coming up defensive, the other reaching for the skillet like a weapon. The man stopped walking. He stood maybe 15 feet back, hands visible at his sides, posture careful. Tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate irregularly, weathered face beneath a battered hat. His eyes were the color of creekstone, and they took her in with an assessment that felt professional rather than predatory. Didn't mean to startle you. His voice was low, unhurried. You all right? Lena's throat was too dry for speech. She managed to get her feet under her, swaying slightly as she stood. The man's eyes tracked the movement, noticed the tremor in her legs, the way she held herself like something barely held together. That's my fence you're leaning on. No hostility in the words, just fact. Cal Braddock. I run this ranch. She should say something, anything, but the habits of silence had become so deeply ingrained that words felt dangerous, like they might reveal too much. Instead, she bent slowly, retrieved her skillet, held it against her chest again. Cal waited. The sun beat down. Somewhere distant, cattle lowed. A hawk circled overhead, patient and predatory. You got a name? He asked finally. The truth wanted to come out. Her real name, her real story, all the weight she'd been carrying. Lena bit it back. Names meant records. Records meant being found. You got business here? He tried again, still patient, but she could see him beginning to calculate, to decide. Strangers meant trouble. A strange woman alone, half-starved and silent, probably meant more trouble than most. 3 words. She could manage 3 words. I can cook? Cal's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He glanced past her toward the ranch house, then back to her face. Really looked at her this time, not at the ragged dress or the dust-caked boots or the way she held that skillet like it contained her whole life. He looked at her eyes, and whatever he saw there made his jaw tighten. When's the last time you ate? Lena's stomach answered before she could stop it, a growl so loud it carried across the distance between them. Heat flooded her face. Cal's mouth quirked, just barely. Not quite a smile. Come on, then. He turned and started walking toward the ranch house, not checking to see if she followed. After 3 steps, he paused. Gates open. You can walk or you can fall down out here. But if you're gonna fall, best do it closer to the house where I can haul you inside without throwing my back out. Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the bone-deep certainty that trusting anyone was a mistake she couldn't afford, Lena's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was closer than she'd come in months. She followed him through the gate. The ranch house kitchen was bigger than the entire servant quarters she'd lived in back east. Lena stood just inside the doorway, skillet still clutched tight, and tried not to stare at the wood-burning stove, the long work table scarred with years of use, the shelves lined with supplies that spoke of a working ranch operation feeding multiple mouths. Cal moved to the pump at the sink, worked the handle until water gushed clear and cold. He filled a tin cup, brought it to her. When she hesitated, he set it on the table between them. "Drink slow," he said. "You gulp it, you'll just bring it back up." Lena's hand shook as she reached for the cup. The first sip was almost painful. Her throat had forgotten what water tasted like, how it was supposed to feel going down. She forced herself to take small swallows, the way he'd instructed, though every instinct screamed to drain the cup in one desperate pull. Cal watched her for a moment, then moved to the stove, began building up the fire that had burned down to coals. "Ranch hands will be back in a few hours expecting supper. Been cooking for them myself since our last cook walked off 3 weeks ago." He glanced at her. "You meant what you said? You can actually cook?" Lena set down the cup, now empty. Her voice came out rough but stronger. "Yes." "How good?" It was the first question that didn't make her want to run. Cooking was safe territory. The one skill she'd developed that belonged only to her, learned at her mother's elbow before the world turned cruel. "Better than you." Cal's eyebrows rose. For a moment she thought she'd overstepped, but then he laughed, a short, surprised sound. "That's a low bar, ma'am. I can burn water and make jerky taste worse than the leather it resembles. But the question stands." Lena looked around the kitchen again, taking proper inventory this time. Flour, salt, lard, dried beans, potatoes, onions, a few sad-looking carrots, bacon hanging from hooks, coffee, sugar. Basic supplies, but enough. More than enough. "How many men?" "8, including me. 9 when Reed gets back from—" Cal stopped, studied her. "Why?" Instead of answering, Lena set her skillet on the work table with a decisive thunk. She crossed to the shelves, began pulling down what she needed. Her hands knew the movements even when her mind was still catching up. This much flour, that much lard, the feel of dough coming together under her palms. "Ma'am." "Lena." The name slipped out before she could stop it. Not her full name, but enough. "And I need to work. If you want to know what I can do, let me show you." Cal opened his mouth like he might argue, then seemed to think better of it. He pulled out a chair at the long kitchen table, sat, and crossed his arms. "All right then, show me." So she did. "What?" Lena's body moved on pure instinct, muscle memory carrying her through exhaustion. She built the fire up properly, got the oven hot while she worked the biscuit dough. Her mother's recipe, the one that had never failed her. While those baked, she started on the beans, sorting through them for stones with practiced efficiency, setting them to soak while she diced the bacon into chunks. Cal stayed quiet, but she felt his attention tracking her movements. She'd grown used to being watched in the Whitmore house, Mrs. Whitmore always watching for mistakes, for any excuse to criticize, to remind Lena exactly how low she'd fallen. But this was different. Cal watched the way someone observed a craftsman at work, curious and assessing but not hostile. The bacon sizzled in her mother's skillet. Lena inhaled deeply, letting the smell ground her in the present moment. This was real. This kitchen, this work, the slight ache beginning in her shoulders as her body remembered what it meant to cook for hungry people who'd actually appreciate it. "You'll want to feed them soon as they come in," Cal said quietly. "They get mean when they're hungry, and they've been hungry a lot lately." Lena nodded, adjusting the heat under the beans. "The biscuits will be ready in 20 minutes. I can make gravy with the bacon drippings. There's enough here for—" She paused, calculating. "Beef stew tomorrow if you've got meat. Today'll be beans and bacon, biscuits and gravy. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. They'll think they've died and gone to heaven. Cal stood, stretched. You need anything? You ask. I'll be in the barn checking on a mare who's due to foal. You remember what I said about falling down? Do it closer to the house, Lena said, surprising herself with the dry edge in her voice. Cal's mouth quirked again, that almost smile. Quick study? Good. He headed for the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Lena? She looked up from the skillet. Whatever you're running from, he said quietly, it stops at that fence line. You understand me? Her throat tightened. She managed a nod. He studied her for another moment, then touched the brim of his hat and disappeared into the afternoon light. Lena stood alone in the kitchen, bacon popping in the skillet, biscuits rising in the oven, and for the first time in months felt something other than fear. Not safety. She was too smart to believe in that anymore. But possibility, maybe. The chance that she might survive whatever came next. She reached for the coffee, began measuring out grounds. The ranch hands would be here soon, and she intended to be ready. They came in like a small stampede just as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Lena heard them before she saw them, boots on the porch, rough voices, the sound of men too tired and too hungry to bother with niceties. She positioned herself near the stove, hands busy with the gravy, and tried not to show how her heart had started racing. The first man through the door stopped dead when he saw her. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 20, with sun-bleached hair and a face full of freckles beneath the trail dust. Who the hell? Watch your mouth. Cal's voice cut across the young man's surprise. He came in behind the others, and suddenly the kitchen that had felt spacious before was crowded with large men in various states of dirt and exhaustion. This is Lena. She's cooking for us now. The men stared. Lena kept her eyes on the gravy, whisking steadily, while her peripheral vision tracked every one of them. 8 men including Cal, like he'd said. The young freckled one, an older man with silver in his beard and knowing eyes. 2 who looked like brothers, same sharp nose and suspicious squint. A massive man who had to duck through the doorframe. 2 more she couldn't categorize yet, and Cal himself. Cooking, one of the brother types said flatly. Since when do we have? Since today. Cal crossed to the wash basin, began cleaning up. You got complaints, Marcus. You're welcome to go back to my attempts at food. Otherwise, sit down and be grateful. The men exchanged glances, some kind of silent communication passing between them. The older one with the silver beard moved first, claiming a spot at the long table. The others followed his lead, settling into chairs with the careful movements of people whose muscles had been worked hard. Lena brought the biscuits to the table first. Golden brown, steaming, perfect. She set the basket down and immediately retreated toward the stove, keeping distance between herself and the men. Years of learned caution wouldn't disappear just because someone had been kind enough to let her cook. The freckled young man reached for a biscuit, split it open. Steam rose. He stared at it like it might be a mirage, then took a bite. His eyes closed. Oh my God. Language, the older man muttered, but he was already reaching for his own biscuit. Lena brought the beans next, thick with bacon and seasoned properly, not the barely salted slop that passed for cooking in most ranch kitchens. Then the gravy, rich and peppery and exactly the right consistency. She poured coffee for each man, kept her movements efficient and her eyes lowered, and tried not to hear their reactions. Tried and failed. This is, Jesus, when did... Marcus, if you don't shut up and eat, I'm taking your portion. This from one of the brothers. Been a while since we had real food, the silver-bearded man said quietly. He looked at Cal. Real long while. Cal was eating with the same focused intensity as his men, but he met the older man's eyes. I know, Dutch. That's why she's here. Lena retreated to the far corner of the kitchen, took a small portion for herself on a tin plate, and sat on a stool near the wood box. She ate quickly and quietly, years of practice making her nearly invisible. The men were too absorbed in their food to pay her much attention anyway, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Except Cal noticed. She felt his glance, saw him register where she'd positioned herself, as far from the table as possible while still being in the same room. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't say anything. Just went back to his food. The meal passed with minimal conversation. Men who'd been running on empty for too long didn't waste energy on talk when there was eating to be done. Lena watched them without seeming to, cataloging reactions, making mental notes. The freckled young one ate like he'd never tasted seasoning before. The brothers were cautious, suspicious still, but their plates emptied fast enough. The massive man ate steadily and methodically, 3 biscuits gone before Lena had finished her own single serving. Dutch, the older one, ate slowly and watched her. Not threatening, just observant. When he finished, he sat back with his coffee and caught her eye. "Ma'am, that was the finest meal I've had since my wife passed, and she was a hell of a cook." Something in Lena's chest loosened slightly. She nodded, unable to quite manage words. "Where'd you learn to cook like that?" the freckled one asked. "I mean, those biscuits, my mom makes good biscuits, but these are—" "Tommy," Cal's voice held a warning note. "Let the lady eat in peace." Tommy flushed, ducked his head. "Sorry, ma'am, didn't mean to pry." "It's all right," Lena heard herself say. "My mother taught me." It was the truth, or part of it. The safe part. The part that didn't include everything that came after. The desperate job in the Whitmore house, the master's son who thought servants were his personal property, the pregnancy that had cost her everything, the baby girl she'd held for exactly 3 hours before they took her away, claiming she'd died. The locket was all she had left, the only proof Sarah had existed at all. Lena's hand moved unconsciously to her pocket where the locket rested, hidden beneath the fabric of her dress. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. She saw Dutch's eyes track the movement, saw him register something in her posture that made his expression gentle with understanding. "Well, your ma taught you right," Dutch said softly. "Thank you for feeding us proper." The other men murmured agreement, even the suspicious brothers. Lena nodded again, stood abruptly, began collecting plates. Gratitude made her uncomfortable. It felt like debt, and debt meant obligation, and obligation meant people had power over you. "Leave those." Cal stood too, moving toward her. "You've done enough for today. I clean as I cook." Lena kept her hands moving, stacking plates efficiently. "Always have." "And I'm telling you to leave it." Not harsh, but firm. "You're dead on your feet. Tommy, Marcus, you two are on cleanup tonight." "Boss, we've been working since—" Marcus started. "And Lena's been working on an empty stomach after God knows how long on the trail." Cal's voice went flat, the tone of someone who wouldn't be argued with. "Clean the kitchen. That's not a request." The brothers grumbled but moved to comply. Lena stood with a plate still in her hands, uncertain. She'd worked in kitchens where the cook cleaned everything, where leaving work for others meant losing your position, meant being disposable. Cal seemed to read her thoughts. "You cooked. They clean. That's how it works here. You want to renegotiate the arrangement, we can talk about it tomorrow when you're not swaying on your feet." Was she swaying? Lena tried to focus, but the edges of her vision had started to blur. The adrenaline that had carried her through cooking was wearing off, leaving nothing but bone-deep exhaustion. "Come on." Cal's hand appeared in her peripheral vision, not touching but guiding. "There's a room off the kitchen. It's small, but it's private, and it's yours if you want it." Private. The word cut through her fog. At the Whitmore house, she'd shared a cramped attic room with 2 other servants. No privacy, no safety, nowhere to hide when things got bad. "I can pay rent. Once I've worked—" "Lena." Cal waited until she looked at him. "You cook like that. You've already paid for a month. We'll figure out the rest later." She wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. The room tilted slightly. Cal's hand moved to her elbow, steadying, and Lena's instinct was to flinch away. But she was too tired, and his touch was careful, impersonal, the kind of contact meant to help rather than control. "This way," he said quietly. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, a small dresser, and a washstand. But it had a door that closed, a window with actual curtains, and a blanket on the bed that looked clean and warm. To Lena, it might as well have been a palace. "Get some sleep," Cal said from the doorway. "If you need anything, I'm in the main house. Second door on the right upstairs. Kitchen's yours to use however you see fit." Lena sat on the edge of the bed, felt it give slightly under her weight. Real mattress, not straw. She looked up at Cal, tried to find words for what she was feeling, came up empty. He seemed to understand anyway. "We're up with the sun. No rush tomorrow morning. The men can handle coffee and cold biscuits for one breakfast. You rest." Then he was gone, door clicking softly shut behind him, leaving Lena alone in her own room for the first time in 2 years. She sat there for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into evening. Male voices from the kitchen, someone laughing, actually laughing, something she realized she hadn't heard much of lately. Water running at the pump, the distant lowing of cattle, normal sounds, safe sounds. Maybe. Lena pulled the locket from her pocket, opened it with trembling fingers. The tiny painted portrait inside was so small she could barely make out features, but she'd memorized every detail. Sarah's dark hair, the curve of her impossibly tiny nose, eyes that had never opened to see the world. On the opposite side, a lock of hair so fine it was nearly transparent, tied with thread Lena had stolen from Mrs. Whitmore's sewing basket. "I'm trying," she whispered to the portrait. "I'm still trying." She closed the locket, tucked it carefully back into her pocket, and lay down fully clothed on top of the blanket. Just for a moment, she told herself, just to rest her eyes. She was asleep before the sun fully set, and for the first time in months, she didn't dream of running. Morning came with rooster crow and the smell of coffee someone had managed not to ruin. Lena woke disoriented, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, her body stiff from sleeping in her clothes. For a panicked moment, she didn't know where she was, her mind cycling through possibilities. The Whitmore house, the boarding house in St. Louis, the barn in Kansas where she'd hidden for 3 nights. Then memory returned. Montana, the ranch, Cal Braddock and his hungry men, and the kitchen where she'd cooked something that tasted like hope. Lena sat up slowly, took inventory. Her dress was a disaster, wrinkled and still dusty from the trail. She desperately needed a bath, a change of clothes, 100 things she didn't have. What she did have was her mother's skillet and a room with a door that locked from the inside. She'd worked with less. The washstand held a pitcher of water. Someone had filled it while she slept, probably Cal. Lena used it sparingly, washing her face and hands, doing what she could to make herself presentable. She rebraided her dark hair, pinned it up tight the way her mother had taught her, the way that kept it out of food and fire and men's reach. When she emerged from her room, the kitchen was empty but showed signs of recent occupation. Someone had built up the fire in the stove. The coffee pot sat warming, and next to it, a folded piece of paper with her name written in careful block letters. Lena unfolded it, squinting at the words. Lena. Men ate cold biscuits and didn't complain. Miracle. Take your time. Pantry needs inventory if you're willing. Back by noon. Cal. She read it twice, then set it down carefully. Being given time, being trusted with the pantry, being asked rather than ordered, it all felt slightly unreal. At the Whitmore house, every moment had been accounted for, every task assigned with the implicit threat that failure meant dismissal. Or worse. Lena pushed the memories away and focused on the present. Inventory. She could do that. The pantry was larger than she'd realized, a whole room off the kitchen with shelves running floor to ceiling. She found a pencil and paper, began making lists. Flour, plenty. Sugar, running low. Salt, good supply. Dried beans in abundance, several varieties, which suggested someone had been doing the ordering with at least minimal thought. Lard, bacon, dried beef. Coffee. She'd need to check with Cal about budget, but they'd need more within a month if the men drank it the way most ranch hands did. She was deep in counting potato sacks when she heard horses outside, voices. Not the ranch hands. These were different, lighter. One of them laughed, a sound that made Lena freeze with her hand on a sack of cornmeal. A woman. There was a woman here. Footsteps on the porch, then the kitchen door opened. Cal? You here? I brought those. Oh! Lena turned to find a woman standing in the doorway, maybe 35, with reddish-brown hair escaping from a practical bun and a small boy clutching her skirt. The woman's surprise was evident but not hostile. The boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, stared at Lena with huge, dark eyes. I'm sorry, the woman said quickly. I didn't know Cal had... Are you... She paused, recalibrated. I'm Mara Bell. My ranch borders Cal's to the east. This is my son, Owen. Lena stepped out of the pantry, acutely aware of her wrinkled dress and probably wild appearance. Lena, I'm the new cook. Cook! Mara's face lit up. Oh, thank God. I've been trying to get Cal to hire someone for weeks. The man can build anything, fix anything, manage a ranch in his sleep, but put him in front of a stove and you're lucky if the building doesn't burn down. She paused. Sorry, I'm talking too much. Owen, say hello to Miss Lena. The boy pressed closer to his mother's skirt, but managed a small, hello. Something in Lena's chest twisted. Sarah would have been about this age by now, if she'd lived. If the Whitmores had been telling the truth about her death, which Lena had never quite believed. The locket had been tucked in Sarah's blanket the last time Lena saw her. How would she have it back if the baby had truly died? Hello, Owen, Lena said softly. Are you hungry? The boy's eyes went even wider. He nodded. There are biscuits from yesterday. They're probably still good. Do you like biscuits? Owen looked up at his mother, who smiled. He loves biscuits, but we don't want to impose. It's no imposition. Lena was already moving toward the bread box, grateful for something to do with her hands. I need to test whether they keep well overnight anyway. She found the leftover biscuits, split one, and spread it with butter and a tiny bit of precious honey she'd discovered in the pantry. She brought it to the table, set it down, then retreated back toward the stove. Her safe distance, she was learning. Owen climbed into a chair, took a tentative bite, then made a sound of pure happiness. Mara laughed. I think that's approval. Owen's usually picky. He has good taste. Lena poured coffee for Mara without asking, set the cup down. You're welcome to stay. I'm just doing inventory. Mara accepted the coffee gratefully. Actually, I came to talk to Cal about the harvest supper. It's in a few weeks. We try to get all the local ranchers together once a year, share food, let the children play, remind ourselves we're neighbors and not just strangers spread across too much land. Cal usually avoids it, but I keep hoping. She took a sip, closed her eyes. This is excellent coffee. At my place, it mostly tastes like creek water. Despite herself, Lena felt a small smile tug at her mouth. It's about the ratio and the heat. Too hot, and it burns. Too cool, and it's weak. See, I need you to come live with me. Mara grinned, then sobered slightly. Sorry, that was pushy. I don't mean to pry, but are you settling in all right? The men treating you well? The question held genuine concern. Lena hesitated, unused to being asked about her well-being by someone who seemed to actually care about the answer. They've been respectful. Good. They should be. Cal runs a decent outfit and he doesn't tolerate nonsense. Mara watched Owen demolish his biscuit with the focused intensity of a small child. I run my place alone since my husband passed 3 years back. It's not easy, but the community here, most of them are good people. They help when they can. Alone. A widow with a small child managing a ranch. Lena felt a flicker of kinship. That must be hard. Some days more than others. Mara's expression clouded briefly, then cleared. But we manage. Owen and me, we're a good team. Aren't we, sweetheart? Owen nodded seriously, his mouth too full of biscuit to speak. The kitchen door opened again, and Cal walked in with Dutch and Tommy behind him. All three men stopped when they saw Mara. Mara, Cal's tone was carefully neutral. Wasn't expecting you. I came to harass you about the harvest supper, Mara said cheerfully, and to bring you those fence posts you needed. They're in the wagon, but I got distracted by actual edible food and pleasant company. Cal's eyes moved to Lena, who was back by the stove, trying to be invisible. Something in his expression softened. Lena's settling in. I can see that. Cal, you actually hired someone competent. I'm impressed. Mara stood, brushed crumbs from her skirt. Owen, we should let these people work. Say thank you to Miss Lena. Thank you, Miss Lena, Owen said solemnly. Then, with a child's devastating directness, you're pretty when you smile. Lena froze. She couldn't remember the last time someone had called her pretty, couldn't remember the last time she'd smiled enough for anyone to notice. Heat flooded her face. Owen! Mara's voice held embarrassment, but also amusement. We don't... It's all right, Lena managed. She looked at the boy, this small person with his mother's eyes and his own guileless honesty. Thank you, Owen. That's very kind. Cal cleared his throat. I'll help you load those posts, Mara. I've got them already loaded, but you can walk me out and pretend to be helpful. Mara headed for the door, then paused. Lena, you should come to the harvest supper. New people are always welcome, and I make a terrible pie that everyone pretends to enjoy. You could show me up, and I wouldn't even mind. Before Lena could formulate a response, any response, Mara was gone, Owen's small hand in hers, leaving Lena alone with Cal, Dutch, and Tommy in a kitchen that suddenly felt too quiet. Dutch broke the silence first. That woman could talk a fence post into dancing. Tommy laughed. She's nice, though. And Owen's a good kid. They are, Cal agreed. He looked at Lena. You don't have to go to the supper if you don't want to. Mara means well, but she doesn't understand that some people prefer quiet. Lena nodded, grateful for the out. The thought of a gathering of people and questions and attention made her skin crawl. I'll think about it. Fair enough. Cal moved toward the door, then stopped. Inventory going all right? Yes, I have a list of things we'll need soon. Good. Leave it on the table. I'll take care of ordering. He paused, seemed to be choosing his words. Lena, if you need anything, clothes, supplies, whatever, you let me know. Consider it part of your pay. Pride wanted her to refuse, but practicality won out. She desperately needed at least one more dress, undergarments that fit properly, a dozen small necessities. Thank you. After the men left, Lena returned to the pantry and her inventory, but her mind kept circling back to Owen's words. You're pretty when you smile. When had she stopped smiling? She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It had been gradual, like water wearing away stone. The job at the Whitmore house had done it, maybe. Or the pregnancy. Or the birth. And the 3 hours of holding Sarah before they took her away. Or the moment she realized the Whitmores would never tell her the truth, would never give her back the one thing in the world that mattered. Or maybe it had started earlier, when her mother died and left her alone with nothing but a skillet and recipes she'd memorized. When she'd realized that being good at something didn't mean the world would be kind to you. Lena touched her pocket, felt the locket's familiar weight. She'd gotten good at not smiling, at not showing anything that might be used against her. But Owen had seen through it somehow, had noticed the brief crack in her armor. She'd have to be more careful. The days developed a rhythm. Lena woke before dawn, started the fire, had coffee and breakfast ready when the men came in from their first round of chores. They ate quickly, efficiently, and disappeared back to whatever needed doing. She spent mornings cooking, afternoons preparing for the next meal, evenings cleaning and planning. The men gave her space, seemed to sense her need for distance. They thanked her for meals, complimented her cooking, but didn't push for conversation. Dutch sometimes stayed a few extra minutes after breakfast, drinking coffee and reading the worn Bible he carried. But he didn't try to engage her beyond simple pleasantries. It was Tommy who started to chip away at her isolation, probably without meaning to. Miss Lena? He appeared in the kitchen doorway one afternoon, hat in hand, looking uncertain. I don't mean to bother you, but do you know anything about bread? Lena looked up from the chicken she was preparing for supper. What kind of bread? Just bread. My ma used to make it, and I've been trying to remember how, but every time I attempt it, it comes out hard as a rock. I thought maybe, if you had time, you could show me? It was such an unexpected request that Lena didn't know how to respond. You want to learn to bake bread? Tommy flushed. I know it's not really men's work, but I miss it. The smell, you know? It reminded me of home, and I thought, well, someday I might have my own place, and it'd be nice to know how. Something in his earnestness got past her defenses. Lena set down the knife, wiped her hands on her apron. All right, but it takes time. You'll need to help with all of it. Tommy's face lit up. Yes, ma'am, whatever you need. So Lena taught him. Not just the mechanics, measuring flour, working the dough, judging when it had risen enough, but the feel of it, the way good bread dough should be slightly tacky but not sticky, should resist and give an equal measure under your hands. She showed him how to shape loaves, how to tell when the oven was hot enough, how to know when the bread was done by sound as much as sight. Tommy was a surprisingly good student, focused, careful, asking questions that showed he was actually thinking about what he was learning. When they pulled the first loaves from the oven, golden and fragrant, his whoop of triumph made Lena jump. Sorry. he said quickly, but he was grinning. But look at that, that's actual bread. It is, Lena agreed. Despite herself, she felt a flicker of satisfaction. Teaching was different from just cooking. It meant trusting someone with knowledge, with skills that mattered. Can I try one? Tommy was already reaching for a loaf. Let it cool first, or you'll burn your mouth. But he was young and impatient, and when he finally broke off a piece and tasted it, the expression on his face was worth the wait. Oh man, this is… Miss Lena, I made this. Well, you helped, but I actually made bread that doesn't taste like gravel. Lena found herself almost smiling again. You did well. Practice it a few more times and you'll have it down. Will you show me pie next? Ma used to make apple pie that… Tommy stopped abruptly, his expression shifting to something complicated. Sorry, I shouldn't talk about her so much. Why not? The question came out before Lena could stop it. Tommy shrugged, suddenly looking much younger than his 20 years. She passed last winter, fever. Pa couldn't handle the farm without her, sold it and moved in with my sister in Denver. I came out here because I couldn't stand being in that house without her in it, you know? Everything reminded me. He trailed off, but Lena understood. She understood completely. I know, she said quietly. My mother died too, 4 years ago. Some days it feels like yesterday. They stood there in the warm kitchen, the smell of fresh bread surrounding them, two people connected by loss and the recipes meant to ease it. She'd have liked you, Tommy said finally. Ma, I mean. She always said the best cooks were the ones who put love into the food, even when their hearts were breaking. Lena's throat tightened. She turned away, busied herself with cleaning the work surface. We should get this cooled properly, and you have chores. Yes, ma'am. Tommy headed for the door, paused. Thank you for showing me. It meant a lot. After he left, Lena stood alone in the kitchen, hands braced on the work table, trying to steady herself. She'd been so focused on keeping everyone at a distance that she hadn't expected this. Someone seeing past her walls, not with demands or expectations, but with simple, genuine human connection. It was dangerous. Connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant hurt. She'd learned that lesson thoroughly, but the bread sat cooling on the table, proof that some things were worth the risk of showing yourself, even just a little. The second week brought its own challenges. Marcus and his brother James started arguing at breakfast over something Lena couldn't quite follow. Water rights, maybe, or fence line disputes. Their voices rose, tension crackling between them, and suddenly the peaceful kitchen felt like it might explode. Lena watched from her position near the stove, calculating. She'd seen men fight before, had been caught in the crossfire more than once at the Whitmore house when the master's sons got drunk and violent. She knew the signs, knew when words were about to become fists. Marcus, Cal's voice cut across the argument, quiet but absolute. James, outside. Now. But Marcus started. Outside. The brothers went, still bristling, and the rest of the men filed out after them, leaving Lena alone with the breakfast dishes and her racing heart. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to unclench her hands from where they'd been gripping her apron. Just words, just an argument. Nothing like the Whitmore house, nothing like… The kitchen door opened again. Lena flinched before she could stop herself. It was only Dutch. The older man took in her posture, the way she'd pressed herself against the far counter, and his expression gentled. Sorry to startle you. Left my gloves. He retrieved them from the table, but instead of leaving immediately, he poured himself another cup of coffee and settled into a chair. Not blocking her exit, Lena noticed, not crowding her space. Those two have been at each other since they were boys, Dutch said conversationally. Known them their whole lives. They fight like cats in a sack, but they'd die for each other if it came to it. Lena said nothing, but she felt her shoulders start to lower slightly from around her ears. Cal won't let it come to blows, Dutch continued. He's firm about that. Violence has its place, defending the herd, protecting what's yours, but not in the house, and not between his men. You're safe here. The word hung in the air between them. Safe. As if anywhere was truly safe, as if promises meant anything when men got angry and women were convenient targets. Dutch seemed to read her skepticism. I know you've got no reason to believe me. Don't know your story, but I can see enough to know it wasn't kind to you. All I can say is this. Cal Braddock is one of the best men I know, and I've known my share of both kinds. He took a sip of coffee. He says you're under his protection. That means something here. Won't stop you being cautious. Lord knows caution's kept you alive this long, but you should know it all the same. He stood, headed for the door, paused with his hand on the frame. That bread Tommy made yesterday? He's been talking about it non-stop. Boy hasn't smiled that much since he got here. Whatever you're doing, teaching him, talking with him, it matters. Thought you should know that too. Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with her thoughts and the dishes. She washed them slowly, methodically, trying to process Dutch's words. Protection. Safety. The idea that she mattered beyond her ability to produce meals. It all felt foreign, like words in a language she'd once known but had forgotten. Through the window she could see Cal with Marcus and James, the three of them talking. Cal's posture was relaxed but alert, and whatever he was saying seemed to be getting through. The brothers' aggressive stances were softening, arms uncrossing, heads nodding. Lena dried the last plate, put it away, and made a decision. She'd stay cautious, keep her walls up, maintain her distance. But maybe she could let herself believe, just a little, that not every place was the Whitmore house, that not every man was the master's son, that Dutch might be telling the truth when he said she was safe here. Maybe. That night, after the supper dishes were done and the ranch had settled into evening quiet, Lena sat in her small room with the locket open in her palm. The tiny portrait of Sarah gazed up at her, frozen in time, forever 3 hours old, forever lost. I cooked for 8 men today, Lena whispered to the portrait, and one of them thanked me. Really thanked me, like what I did mattered beyond just filling bellies. I taught a boy to make bread, and he smiled like I'd given him the world. She traced the edge of the portrait with her finger. I know I'm supposed to be running. I know I'm supposed to keep moving, stay ahead of anyone the Whitmores might send looking. But Mama, I'm so tired of running. And this place, it's not perfect, but it's the closest thing to home I've had since you died, since Sarah was taken, since the world proved it had no use for women like Lena except as servants and victims. Is it wrong to want to stay? Lena asked the portrait. Is it stupid to think maybe, just maybe, I could have something here, even if it's just a kitchen and a room with a door that locks? The portrait didn't answer, of course, but in the silence of her small room, with the sounds of the ranch settling around her like a lullaby, Lena felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite hope. She wasn't ready for that yet. But possibility, maybe. The chance that this time, things might be different. She closed the locket, tucked it carefully into her pocket, and lay down to sleep. Tomorrow she'd make Dutch's favorite biscuits and Tommy his apple pie. She'd keep her distance from Marcus and James, stay alert, stay ready to run if she needed to. But tonight, she'd let herself rest. And that at least was something. The third week brought an unexpected visitor. Lena was in the garden behind the kitchen, a scraggly patch that had been neglected for months but still produced enough carrots and onions to be useful, when she heard the horse. Not the familiar sounds of the ranch hands coming and going, but a single rider, moving with purpose toward the main house. She straightened slowly, one hand shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. The rider was a man, well-dressed in a way that immediately marked him as not from around here. Eastern clothes, expensive horse, the kind of polished presentation that set Lena's instincts screaming. Her first thought was to run. Her second was that running would draw attention, so she stayed frozen in the garden, dirt under her fingernails, heart hammering against her ribs, and watched as Cal emerged from the barn to meet the stranger. They were too far away for Lena to hear the conversation, but she could read body language well enough. The stranger was doing most of the talking, gesturing as he spoke. Cal's posture had gone very still, very controlled, the way a man stood when he was choosing not to react. After a few minutes, Cal shook his head firmly, said something short, and pointed back toward the road. The stranger didn't leave immediately. He argued, his gestures becoming more insistent. Cal's response was to cross his arms and plant his feet, immovable as the mountains on the horizon. Finally, the stranger seemed to accept defeat. He mounted his horse and rode off, but not before looking around the ranch with an assessing gaze that made Lena's skin crawl. She ducked behind the garden fence, praying he hadn't seen her. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her apron, tried to breathe, tried not to spiral into panic. "Lena!" She jumped violently. Cal had crossed the yard without her hearing and now stood a careful distance away, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she managed. I was just... The garden... That man," Cal said quietly. "He say anything to you?" "No, we didn't speak." Cal studied her for a long moment, and Lena had the distinct impression he was seeing far more than she wanted him to. He was looking for someone, a woman who ran away from a household back east, said she stole something valuable. Lena's blood turned to ice. Her hand moved unconsciously to her pocket, to the locket hidden there. "I told him I hadn't seen anyone matching that description," Cal continued, his tone carefully neutral. "Told him this is a working ranch, not a way station for runaways. Suggested he try the next town over." "Thank you," Lena whispered. "Lena." Cal waited until she met his eyes. "Is he going to come back?" The honest answer was that she didn't know. The Whitmores had money, influence, connections that reached farther than most people realized. If they wanted her found badly enough, they'd keep sending men until one of them succeeded. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe." Cal nodded slowly, like this was the answer he'd expected. "Then we need to talk. Not here. Too open. Come to the barn in an hour. I'll make sure we're alone." He turned and walked away before Lena could respond, leaving her standing in the garden with dirt on her hands and terror clawing at her throat. She should run. Pack what little she had, take her skillet and her locket, disappear into the Montana wilderness before the tracker came back with reinforcements. It's what she'd done before, what she'd gotten good at, staying one step ahead, never letting anyone get close enough to ask questions. But the thought of leaving made something in her chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She'd been here 3 weeks. 3 weeks of cooking in a real kitchen, sleeping in a real bed, being treated with something approaching respect. 3 weeks of Tommy's eager questions and Dutch's quiet understanding and Cal's steady presence. 3 weeks of feeling almost human again. Lena looked down at her hands, at the dirt under her nails from working in a garden she'd started to think of as partly hers. Then she went inside to wash up and wait for the hour to pass. The barn smelled of hay and horse and leather, familiar scents that reminded Lena of her childhood before everything went wrong. Cal was waiting near the back, checking the hoof of a bay mare who stood patiently under his hands. He didn't look up when Lena entered, just kept working. "Close the door," he said quietly. She did, then stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure where to position herself. Cal finished with the mare, gave her a pat, and turned to face Lena. In the dim barn light, his expression was harder to read than usual. "I'm not going to ask you questions you don't want to answer," he said, "but I need to know what we're dealing with. That man today, he's a tracker, professional. The kind people hire when they want something found and money's no object." Lena's hands clenched in her apron. "I didn't steal anything, not the way he probably described it. But you took something." It wasn't a question. Lena met his eyes, saw no judgment there, only a need to understand. "A locket. It was my daughter's. They took her from me and said she died, but I never believed them. The locket was in her blanket when they carried her away. It's the only proof I have that she existed." Cal's jaw tightened. "How old?" "She'd be 4 now, if she's alive." Lena's voice cracked on the words. "They told me she died in the night, that they'd already buried her. But I heard crying the next day, and when I tried to find out the truth, Mrs. Whitmore had me locked in the cellar for being hysterical." "Jesus." Cal scrubbed a hand over his face. "So you ran?" "I ran. I've been running for months. I thought, Montana's far enough, remote enough. I thought maybe they'd give up." She laughed bitterly. "I was wrong." Cal was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "I lost my wife 5 years ago, childbirth. The baby too, a boy. They're buried on the hill behind the house." Lena's breath caught. "I'm sorry." "I tell you that so you know I understand what it's like to lose a child. And I'm telling you now, that tracker isn't setting foot on this property again. If he comes back, if anyone comes looking, the answer is the same. We haven't seen anyone matching that description." "You can't..." Lena started. I can, and I will. Cal's tone went flat. Absolute. You work here. You're under my protection. That means something, Lena. It means I don't let people get hunted on my land, especially not when the crime is taking back something that belonged to your own daughter. Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She hadn't cried in months, had taught herself that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. Why? Why would you risk trouble for me? Cal looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. Because Dutch was right. You matter here. Because Tommy smiles again when he bakes bread. Because the men are happier and work better when they're properly fed. Because he stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. Because it's the right thing to do, simple as that. It wasn't simple, and they both knew it, but Lena was too grateful, too overwhelmed to argue. If they come back with the sheriff, then we deal with it. But I know Sheriff Hayes, he's a decent man, and he doesn't have much patience for Eastern money trying to throw weight around in his territory. We'll handle it if it comes to that. And if they send more trackers? Same answer. Cal's expression softened slightly. Lena, I'm not saying there's no risk, but running hasn't kept you safe. It's just kept you alone. Maybe it's time to try standing still and letting other people help. The words hit harder than Lena expected. Standing still meant trusting, and trust had been beaten out of her by experience. But Cal was right about one thing. Running had only brought her here, to this barn, to this moment. Maybe it was time for a different strategy. All right, she said quietly. I'll stay. For now. Good. Cal moved toward the barn door, paused with his hand on it. One more thing. You should know that most of the men have figured out you're running from something. They don't know what, and they're not asking. But if trouble comes, they'll stand with us. All of them. Even Marcus and James? The question came out before Lena could stop it. Cal's mouth quirked. Especially those two. They're suspicious of strangers, which makes them perfect for watching the roads. Nothing gets past the Wilson brothers when they're paying attention. After Cal left, Lena stood alone in the barn, letting the reality of what had just happened settle over her. For the first time since leaving the Whitmore house, someone knew her secret, or enough of it, and hadn't turned her away. Cal had looked at her situation, understood the danger, and chosen to help anyway. It felt dangerous and terrifying, and underneath all that, like hope. Lena touched the locket in her pocket, traced the familiar shape through the fabric. Did you hear that, Sarah? She whispered. Someone's fighting for us. I don't know if that makes us stupid or lucky, but I'm going to believe it means something. The mare in the nearby stall snorted softly, as if in agreement. Lena allowed herself a small, real smile before heading back to the kitchen to start supper. The men were quieter than usual that evening, and Lena wondered how much they knew. Cal must have said something, given them some version of events, because the way they moved around her had shifted. Not aggressive, but protective. Marcus positioned himself near the window where he could see the road. James sat where he had a clear view of both doors. Dutch kept his rifle closer than usual. Tommy was the only one who acted normally, chattering about the bread he'd made that morning and how it had turned out almost as good as Lena's. The crust wasn't quite right, though, too pale. I think I didn't get the oven hot enough. Probably, Lena agreed, grateful for the normalcy of the conversation. You have to give it time to heat properly, even when you're impatient. That's what Ma used to say, too, Tommy grinned. Said I was always rushing, trying to get to the good part before putting in the work. Smart woman, your Ma, Dutch said quietly. The meal passed with more small talk, careful and deliberate, like everyone had agreed to pretend this was just another ordinary evening. Lena appreciated the effort even as she felt the tension underneath it, the awareness that something had shifted, that danger had come close enough to touch. After the men left and the kitchen was clean, Lena found herself too restless to sleep. She lit a lamp and started preparing dough for the next day's bread, needing the familiar rhythm of kneading to settle her nerves. She was wrist-deep in flour when she heard the soft knock on the kitchen door. Her heart jumped, but it was just Mara, with Owen already drowsy on her hip. I'm sorry to come so late, Mara said quietly. Cal stopped by earlier, said you might want company. I brought Owen because, well, I didn't want to leave him alone, and I thought maybe... She paused, reading Lena's expression. I'm being pushy again, aren't I? No, Lena said, surprising herself. Come in, I'm just making bread. Mara settled Owen on a bench near the warm stove, where he immediately curled up and started dozing. Then she joined Lena at the work table, watching her hands work the dough with practiced efficiency. Cal told me a little, Mara said carefully. Not much, just that you had some trouble today, and that you might be feeling unsettled. He thought another woman around might help. Lena kept kneading, focusing on the feel of the dough under her palms. Did he tell you what kind of trouble? No, and I won't ask if you don't want to tell me. Mara picked up a cloth, began wiping down the already clean table, just to have something to do with her hands. But I want you to know, if you need help, any kind of help, you can ask me. I know we barely know each other, but women out here, we have to look out for each other. There's too few of us and too much land between. The kindness in her voice made Lena's throat tight. Thank you. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Lena kneading and Mara puttering around the kitchen, both of them keeping an eye on Owen's sleeping form. Finally, Mara spoke again. When Robert died, my husband, I thought about leaving, going back east to my family, letting them take care of Owen and me. It would have been easier, safer. She paused, staring out the dark window. But this was our place, you know? We built it together. And I couldn't stand the idea of someone else living in the house we'd made, raising cattle on land we'd cleared. So you stayed, Lena said quietly. So I stayed. And it's been hard and lonely, and some days I question whether I'm doing the right thing, but it's mine and Owen's, and that matters. Mara looked at Lena. What I'm trying to say is, sometimes the brave thing isn't running away from danger. Sometimes it's deciding something is worth fighting for and standing your ground. Lena shaped the dough into loaves, her movements automatic while her mind worked through Mara's words. Worth fighting for. The Whitmore house hadn't been worth fighting for. It had been a trap, a place where she had no power and no allies. But this ranch, this kitchen, these people who'd started to feel almost like friends, maybe that was different. I've spent so long running, Lena said slowly. I'm not sure I remember how to stand still. Then learn. Mara's voice was gentle but firm. You've got people here who'll teach you. Cal's a good man, stubborn as a mule but good. And the hands, they're rough around the edges, but decent. Even those Wilson brothers, once you get past the scowling, Lena found herself almost smiling at that. They do scowl a lot. It's practically a family trait, but they're loyal, and that counts for something. Mara checked on Owen, adjusted the blanket someone had draped over his sleeping form. You should come to the harvest supper. I know it seems like too much right now, but it would be good for you. Good for people to see you as part of the community, not just the new cook at Braddock's ranch. The thought of being surrounded by strangers, of questions and attention, and the risk of saying the wrong thing made Lena's stomach clench. But Mara had a point. If she was going to stay, if she was going to try standing her ground instead of running, she needed to become part of this place, really part of it, not just the woman who cooked in the background. I'll think about it, Lena said, which was more commitment than she'd expected to give. Mara seemed to understand. That's all I'm asking. Now, are you going to show me how you get your bread crust so perfect? Or is that a trade secret? Despite everything, Lena felt her lips curve into a smile. It's the steam. You put a pan of hot water in the bottom of the oven while it bakes. Creates moisture that helps the crust brown properly. See, this is why I need you in my life. Mara grinned. I've been baking bread for 15 years and never knew that. They spent the next hour talking about cooking, about ranch life, about the small practical concerns that made up daily existence. It was so normal, so ordinary, that Lena almost forgot about the tracker and the danger and everything that had brought her here. For a little while, she was just a woman in a kitchen, talking with a friend about bread and cattle and the upcoming harvest. When Mara finally left, Owen sleepy-eyed and clinging to her neck, Lena stood in the doorway and watched them ride away into the darkness. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky in impossible abundance. Somewhere out there, the tracker might be planning his next move. The Whitmores might be sending more men, more money, more pressure. But here, on this ranch, in this moment, Lena had allies. People who knew at least part of her truth and chose to stand with her anyway. It didn't erase the danger, but it changed the equation in ways she was still trying to understand. She locked the kitchen door, checked it twice, and went to bed with her skillet within arm's reach and the locket pressed against her heart. The days that followed were tense but uneventful. The tracker didn't return, at least not that anyone saw. Marcus and James took turns watching the road, reporting back to Cal each evening. Dutch started carrying his rifle even for short trips around the property. Tommy asked if Lena wanted him to sleep in the barn, closer to her room, and seemed genuinely disappointed when she declined. Lena threw herself into cooking with renewed intensity, needing the work to keep her mind occupied. She made everything from scratch: bread, butter, cheese, even rendering her own lard. The men ate like kings and stopped looking quite so worried, though she noticed they never fully relaxed. It was during this time that Owen started visiting more regularly. Mara would bring him by in the afternoons, and the boy would watch Lena cook with the kind of fascinated attention that reminded her achingly of Sarah. She'd imagined teaching her daughter to cook someday, passing down her mother's recipes the way they'd been passed to her. "Why do you push the dough down like that?" Owen asked one afternoon, perched on a stool near the work table. "Because it's risen too much," Lena explained, demonstrating the technique. "You have to punch it down and let it rise again. Makes the bread lighter." "Can I try?" Lena hesitated, then nodded. Owen climbed down from his stool and approached the dough with the kind of seriousness only small children could muster. His punch was more of a gentle poke, but Lena guided his small hands, showing him how to fold and press. "Like this?" Owen looked up at her, his face so earnest and hopeful that something in Lena's chest cracked open. "Exactly like that. You're a natural." Owen beamed. Owen. From her seat near the window, Mara watched with soft eyes. "You're good with him," she said quietly. Lena shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "He's a good student. He likes you, talks about you all the time. Miss Lena this, Miss Lena that. I think he misses having family around." Mara paused. "We both do, if I'm honest." The admission hung in the air between them. Lena focused on guiding Owen's hands through the dough, not sure how to respond. Family was a concept that had been taken from her piece by piece, first her mother, then Sarah, then any hope of the life she'd imagined for herself. "You're coming to the harvest supper, right?" Owen asked suddenly, looking up at Lena with wide eyes. "Mama said you might. There's games and dancing and everything." Lena glanced at Mara, who shrugged helplessly. "I may have mentioned it," Mara admitted. "Owen's been asking every day since." "Please come," Owen said, his voice taking on that pleading quality children deployed with devastating effectiveness. "I want to show you my best marble, and Mama said there'll be pie, but I told her your pie is better." "Owen, that's rude," Mara chided gently, though she was smiling. "But it's true." Owen looked genuinely distressed. "Your pie's good, Mama, but Miss Lena's it's like—" He struggled for words, his small face scrunched in concentration. "It tastes like it was made by someone who really cares." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. She turned away quickly, pretending to check the oven, blinking hard against the sudden sting of tears. A 4-year-old child had seen something in her cooking that she'd tried so hard to hide. The fact that despite everything, despite all the walls she'd built and all the distance she'd maintained, she still cared. About the food, about the people eating it, about doing something right in a world that had taken so much from her. "Miss Lena?" Owen's voice was uncertain now, worried he'd said something wrong. Lena took a breath, steadied herself, turned back with what she hoped was a normal expression. "I'll think about the supper. That's the best I can promise right now." Owen seemed to accept this. He went back to helping with the dough, chattering about the games he wanted to play, and the friends he wanted to introduce Lena to, his child's mind already moving past the awkward moment. But Mara caught Lena's eye across the kitchen, and the understanding there was almost too much to bear. That evening, after Mara and Owen had left, and the supper dishes were clean, Cal found Lena in the garden. She'd taken to spending time there in the evenings, working the soil, pulling weeds, doing the kind of mindless physical labor that kept her hands busy and her thoughts manageable. "Mara said Owen's campaigning hard for you to come to the harvest supper," Cal said, settling himself on the fence rail nearby. Lena pulled another weed, tossed it onto her growing pile. "He's persistent. Gets it from his mother." Cal was quiet for a moment. You know you don't have to go if you're not ready. Nobody's going to force you. I know. But it might be good for you. Let people see you're part of things here, part of the community. Makes it harder for outsiders to cause trouble when you've got the whole valley on your side. Lena sat back on her heels, wiping dirt from her hands. Is that what they'd be? On my side. The ones who matter would be. Cal's voice was certain. Montana folks, we're suspicious of strangers and protective of our own. You've been feeding the men at this ranch for a month now. As far as they're concerned, that makes you one of us. I'm not from here. Neither am I. Came out from Ohio 15 years ago with nothing but a horse and a dream of starting fresh. Cal looked out across the darkening land. That's the thing about this territory. It doesn't much care where you came from, only what you do once you're here. You cook well, you work hard, you don't cause trouble. That's enough for most people. Lena wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her to be suspicious of acceptance. People said they didn't care about your past until they learned something that changed their minds. The Whitmores had seemed kind at first too, offering her a job when she was desperate, promising fair treatment. Look how that had turned out. As if reading her thoughts, Cal said quietly, I know you've been given reasons not to trust people. Can't blame you for that. All I'm asking is that you don't let one bad experience, or however many you've had, convince you the whole world's rotten. Some of it is, sure, but some of it's worth believing in. He slid off the fence, started to walk away, then paused. Dutch is taking the wagon into town tomorrow to pick up supplies. If you want to come along, get some fresh air, maybe pick out some fabric for a new dress. It's allowed. You've earned it. I don't need... Lena started. Lena. Cal turned back, his expression patient but firm. You've been wearing the same two dresses since you got here, washing one while you wear the other. You've earned new clothes. You've earned a lot of things. Let yourself have them. After he left, Lena stayed in the garden until full dark, thinking about trust and community and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could have something resembling a normal life here. The trip to town with Dutch the next day was both nerve-wracking and oddly liberating. Lena sat beside him on the wagon bench, watching the landscape roll past, trying not to flinch every time they passed another traveler on the road. Dutch kept up a steady stream of comfortable conversation, not demanding responses but filling the silence in a way that didn't feel oppressive. Town's not much, he warned as they approached. General store, saloon, church, post office, maybe 30 people on a busy day. It was bigger than Lena expected, but still small enough that she felt exposed, visible. Every person they passed seemed to stare, though Dutch assured her that was normal. New faces are entertainment around here. Give them a week and you'll be old news. At the general store, Dutch introduced her to the proprietor, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Chen, who looked Lena over with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. Cal's new cook. Heard the food's improved considerably. News travels fast, Lena said carefully. Mrs. Chen smiled. Small territory, not much else to talk about. You need fabric? I've got some nice calico that just came in, and some wool that would make up into a good winter dress. Lena hesitated, still uncomfortable with the idea of spending money, Cal's money, on herself. Mrs. Chen seemed to sense her reluctance. Cal Braddock's account is good here, she said firmly, and he specifically told me you'd be coming in, that you were to get whatever you needed. So unless you want to go back and tell him you ignored his instructions, I suggest you start looking at fabric. Put that way, Lena didn't have much choice. She selected 2 lengths of fabric, the calico and a sturdy cotton in a deep blue that reminded her of Montana skies, along with thread, needles, and the basic notion she'd need to construct the dresses herself. You sew? Mrs. Chen asked, wrapping the purchases. Well enough. Good skill to have. If you ever want to make extra money, I could use someone who can do alterations. Too many cowboys around here who don't know how to mend their own clothes. Mrs. Chen tallied up the purchases, made a note in her ledger. You settling in all right at the ranch? It was clearly a genuine question, not just polite conversation. Lena considered her answer carefully. Yes, the work is good and Mr. Braddock is fair. He is that. Lost his wife few years back, went dark for a while. Good to hear he's coming back to himself. Mrs. Chen handed over the wrapped packages. You need anything else, you come see me, and tell Cal he still owes me for those tobacco shipments. Outside, Dutch was loading sacks of flour and grain into the wagon. He glanced at Lena's packages and nodded approvingly. Good. You'll fit in better once you've got proper clothes. Not that there's anything wrong with what you've been wearing, but they're worn out and I look like a vagrant, Lena finished dryly. Dutch chuckled. Wasn't going to put it quite that harshly, but yes, come on. Let's get back before the men start complaining about what's for supper. On the ride back, Lena found herself relaxing slightly, the familiar weight of fabric in her lap and the steady rhythm of the wagon soothing something inside her. Dutch was quiet for most of the return journey, but as they approached the ranch, he spoke up. For what it's worth, I think you should come to the harvest supper. I know it seems like a lot, but it'd be good for you. Get you out of that kitchen. Let you see that there's more to life here than just work and worry. Lena didn't answer, but she thought about Owen's eager face, about Mara's gentle insistence, about Cal's practical arguments. Maybe they were all right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and start actually living, whatever that looked like. That night, after supper was done and the kitchen was clean, Lena spread out the blue fabric on her small bed and began cutting out the pieces for a new dress. Her mother had taught her to sew, just like she taught her to cook, both skills meant to make her useful, marriageable, valuable to a future household. Lena wondered what her mother would think of her now, alone on a Montana ranch, hiding from people who wanted to punish her for the crime of loving her own child. She pushed the thought away and focused on her stitching, each small stitch bringing the dress closer to reality. By lamplight, with the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep around her, Lena sewed and tried not to think about what it might mean that she was making something to wear to a social gathering. Tried not to think about how that implied she was planning to stay, to become part of this place, to stop running. She finished the main seams before midnight, held up the half-constructed dress, and allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to walk into that harvest supper wearing something new, something chosen, something that wasn't marked by months of desperate flight. It felt dangerous and terrifying, and underneath all that, like the first real decision she'd made in a very long time. The dress was finished 2 days before the harvest supper, and Lena tried it on in her small room with a mixture of pride and trepidation. The blue fabric draped well, the stitching was even, and for the first time in months, she looked like something other than a woman barely surviving. She looked almost respectable, almost like someone who belonged. She was still standing in front of the small mirror adjusting the collar when she heard the commotion outside. Raised voices, the sharp sound of a horse being reined in hard, boots hitting the ground with aggressive purpose. Every muscle in Lena's body went tight. She knew that sound, the sound of trouble arriving with intention. She changed back into her work dress with shaking hands, her mind already calculating escape routes. The window was small, but she could fit through it. The woods weren't far. She could take her skillet, her locket, leave everything else behind. She'd done it before. But then she heard Cal's voice, low and dangerous, in a way she'd never heard before, and something made her move toward the sound instead of away from it. The kitchen window gave her a view of the yard. The tracker had returned, but this time he wasn't alone. 3 men sat mounted behind him, hard-looking types with the kind of eyes that suggested they were hired for more than just finding people. And standing between them and the ranch house was Cal, with Dutch and the Wilson brothers flanking him like a wall. Lena couldn't hear the conversation clearly through the glass, but she could read the body language. The tracker was gesturing, pointing, making demands. Cal stood absolutely still, arms crossed, immovable. When he finally spoke, even from a distance, Lena could see the tracker flinch. Tommy appeared at the kitchen door, breathing hard like he'd been running. "Miss Lena, you need to stay inside. Lock the doors." "What's happening?" "That man from before he came back, brought friends. Says he's got a legal right to search the property for stolen goods." Tommy's young face was tight with anger. Cal told him he can take his legal right and, well, he wasn't polite about it. Through the window, Lena watched as the tracker produced what looked like a document, waving it like proof. Cal took it, read it with deliberate slowness, then handed it back with what was clearly a flat refusal. "Cal sent me to make sure you're safe," Tommy continued. "He said no matter what happens out there, you stay in here. Don't come out. Don't show yourself." "I can't just hide while people fight my battles for me." "You can, and you will." Tommy's voice was firmer than she'd ever heard it. "Miss Lena, though..." Those men out there, they're not the law. They're hired muscle pretending to have authority. Cal knows it. We all know it. But if they see you, if they can identify you for certain, then it becomes harder to deny. Right now, Cal can honestly say he hasn't harbored any runaway that matches their description. That's not exactly true. It's true enough. You're not a runaway, you're an employee, and you didn't steal anything that wasn't yours by right. Tommy moved to the door, checked the lock. Please, just stay inside. Let us handle this. After he left, Lena stood frozen in the kitchen, listening to the muffled confrontation outside. She felt useless, cowardly, like she was letting others take risks that belonged to her alone. But Tommy was right. Showing herself would only make things worse. The argument outside escalated. She heard Cal's voice rise, sharp and commanding. You want to search my property? Get a real warrant signed by a real judge? Not some bought paper from an Eastern magistrate who's never set foot in Montana territory. Until then, you're trespassing. We have every right to, the tracker started. You have no rights here. This was Dutch, his older voice carrying a different kind of authority. This is private property, and you're not welcome. I suggest you leave before this gets unpleasant. One of the hired men laughed, ugly and threatening. Old man, there's 4 of us and 3 of you. You sure you want to push this? There's 8 of us, actually, Marcus called out from somewhere near the barn. And we're all armed. Are you? Silence. Lena pressed closer to the window, her heart hammering. She could see the men shifting in their saddles, reassessing. The tracker's face had gone red with frustration. This isn't over, he said finally. My employer has resources you can't imagine. We will find what we're looking for. Then you'll find it somewhere else, Cal said flatly. Because it's not here. Now get off my land before I decide you're not just trespassing, you're threatening my property. Montana law is pretty clear about what ranchers can do to protect what's theirs. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then the tracker jerked his reins, turning his horse sharply. You're making a mistake, Braddock. When the truth comes out, the truth is you're harassing a working ranch based on lies from people too rich to face consequences. Cal's voice went even colder. Now ride out, and don't come back. Next time I won't be so polite. The men left at a canter, kicking up dust, their departure aggressive and full of unspoken threats. Lena watched until they disappeared from view, then sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly unsteady. The kitchen door opened and Cal came in, his face still hard with anger. When he saw her, some of the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. You all right? I should be asking you that. They could have tried. Cal moved to the water pump, worked the handle, splashed cold water on his face. But they didn't, because they knew they were outmatched. Bullies fold when you stand up to them. Not always, Lena said quietly. Sometimes they come back with more people, more weapons, more ways to hurt you. Cal dried his face, met her eyes. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. But I meant what I said out there, Lena. This is my land, and you're under my protection. I don't make promises I can't keep. You can't fight the whole world for me. Maybe not, but I can fight off a few hired thugs with delusions of authority. He managed a tight smile. Besides, I wasn't alone. You saw the men out there. They're with us on this. As if summoned by the words, the ranch hands began filtering into the kitchen, each one checking on Lena with varying degrees of subtlety. Dutch squeezed her shoulder as he passed. Marcus actually nodded at her, which for him was practically a declaration of loyalty. Even James, the more suspicious of the Wilson brothers, gave her what might have been the ghost of a smile. Tommy was the last one in, still carrying the rifle he'd grabbed from somewhere. They're gone. Rode hard toward town, but Marcus says he'll keep watch tonight just in case they circle back. They won't, Dutch said confidently. Not after that reception. They'll regroup, maybe try a different approach, but they won't come back here with the same tactics. Lena sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. You didn't bring anything we can't handle, Cal said firmly. And I'll say it one more time so maybe you'll start believing it. You're not a burden, Lena. You're part of this ranch now, same as any of us. We take care of our own. The words settled over the kitchen like a benediction, and Lena felt something shift inside her chest. These men, rough, scarred, most of them carrying their own wounds from life, had chosen to stand between her and danger without hesitation. Not because they owed her, not because they wanted something from her, but simply because she mattered to them. It was more than the Whitmores had ever offered, more than most of the world had shown her, and it terrified her precisely because it meant something real. That evening, Lena cooked with a fierceness that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with gratitude she didn't know how to express. She made everything from scratch: chicken fried perfectly crisp, mashed potatoes whipped until they were clouds, gravy rich enough to make strong men weep, biscuits that practically floated off the plate. For dessert, an apple pie with a crust so flaky it shattered at the touch of a fork. The men ate in reverent silence, and when Dutch finally pushed back from the table with a satisfied sigh, he spoke for all of them. "Lena, if you were trying to thank us with food, consider the message received." "I just cooked dinner," Lena said, but her voice was unsteady. "You did a hell of a lot more than that," Marcus said gruffly, "and we know it." After they'd gone and the kitchen was clean, Lena found Cal on the porch, staring out at the darkening land. She stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering courage, then stepped out to join him. "I've decided to go to the harvest supper," she said quietly. Cal turned to look at her, surprise evident on his face. "Yeah? Yeah, you were right. It's time to stop hiding. If I'm going to stay here, if I'm going to try to build something resembling a life, I need to be part of the community, not just the cook who hides in the kitchen." "That's brave of you." "It's terrifying," Lena corrected. "But I think maybe being brave and being terrified are the same thing sometimes." Cal smiled, a real one that reached his eyes. "I think you might be right about that." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. The ranch feels different with you here. Better." Lena didn't trust herself to respond to that, so she just nodded and retreated back to the safety of the kitchen. But his words stayed with her as she prepared for bed, as she checked the locks twice and laid her skillet within easy reach. Better. She'd made something better, just by being here, by doing what she knew how to do. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Lena threw herself into cooking for the harvest supper, determined to contribute something worthy of the community that had, however unknowingly, sheltered her. She made 3 pies, 2 dozen rolls, a massive pot of beans that would feed an army, and a spice cake that filled the kitchen with the smell of cinnamon and cloves. Mara stopped by to help, bringing Owen, who immediately attached himself to Lena's side, like a small chattering shadow. "What are you making? Can I help? Mama says you're coming to the supper, and I told everyone, and they all want to meet you, and—" "Owen, breathe," Mara laughed. "Give Miss Lena some space to work." But Lena found she didn't mind the child's presence. She set him to tasks that were simple but made him feel important: stirring batter, arranging apples, testing the doneness of cake with a toothpick. Owen took each job seriously, his small face scrunched in concentration, and Lena felt that familiar ache in her chest that was becoming almost comfortable. "You're good with him," Mara observed, watching Lena guide Owen's hands through crimping a pie crust. "Natural." "I had a daughter," Lena heard herself say. The words came out before she could stop them, raw and unplanned. Briefly, Mara's hand stilled in the bread dough she'd been kneading. "Oh, Lena." "She was taken from me. They said she died, but I never believed them." Lena kept her eyes on the pie, on Owen's small hands learning the pattern of the crimp. She'd be about Owen's age now, if she's alive. "I'm so sorry." Mara's voice was thick with emotion. Is that what those men were looking for?" Lena nodded. "I took back the only thing I had of hers. A locket. They called it theft." "That's not theft, that's—" Mara stopped, seemed to struggle for words adequate to her anger. "Those bastards." Owen looked up at his mother, eyes wide at the curse word. Mara flushed. "Sorry, sweetheart. Mama's just upset about something." "About the mean men who came to see Miss Lena?" Owen asked with the perceptiveness of children everywhere. "Yes, exactly that." Owen thought about this for a moment, then reached up and patted Lena's hand with his small flour-dusted one. "Don't worry, Miss Lena. Mr. Cal won't let the mean men get you. He's really good at protecting people." The simple faith in his voice made Lena's throat tight. She managed a nod, unable to speak past the emotion. Mara caught her eye across the table, and the understanding there was complete. Two mothers, two different kinds of loss, finding connection in the shared language of grief and hope and fierce protection of children who deserved better than the world had given them. The morning of the harvest supper dawned clear and cool, perfect autumn weather that made the Montana sky look impossibly blue. Lena, dressed in her new blue dress, spent longer than usual with her hair and stared at her reflection in the small mirror with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She looked like a real person, like someone who might belong to a community, who might have friends and neighbors and a life that extended beyond survival. It was disorienting and wonderful and absolutely terrifying. Tommy knocked on her door just after noon. "Miss Lena, the wagon's ready whenever you are. We've got all your food loaded up." Lena took one last look at herself, touched the locket hidden beneath the fabric of her dress for courage, and stepped out into the afternoon light. The men were already gathered by the wagon, dressed in what passed for their Sunday best. Cal had actually trimmed his beard and wore a clean shirt. Dutch's silver hair was slicked back. Even Marcus and James looked almost presentable, though they still carried that air of perpetual suspicion. When Lena emerged, they all stopped talking. Tommy's jaw actually dropped. Cal recovered first, clearing his throat. "You look nice, Lena." "Very nice," Dutch added with an approving nod. Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. You all clean up well yourselves." The ride to the Bell Ranch, where the supper was being held, took about 30 minutes, and Lena spent most of it trying not to panic. She could do this. She could smile and make small talk and be a normal person at a normal social gathering. She'd done harder things. She'd survived the Whitmore house, survived months on the run, survived confrontation with hired trackers. A harvest supper should be nothing. But when they arrived and she saw the crowd, easily 40 or 50 people, maybe more, her confidence faltered. All those faces, all those potential questions, all those opportunities to make a mistake that would expose her. Cal seemed to sense her hesitation. He appeared at her elbow as she climbed down from the wagon, his presence steady and grounding. "Stay close to me if you want, or Mara. She's already looking for you, but you don't have to do anything you're not ready for." "I'm here," Lena said, mostly to convince herself. "I might as well actually participate." "That's the spirit." Cal offered his arm, a gesture so unexpected that Lena almost didn't know how to respond. But she took it, and together they walked toward the crowd. Mara descended on them immediately, Owen bouncing at her side. "You came! You actually came! Oh, you look beautiful. That dress is perfect. Come on, I'll introduce you around. Not everyone at once, just the important people first." Before Lena could protest, she was being pulled into a whirlwind of names and faces. Mrs. Chen from the general store, looking elegant in a dark green dress. Sheriff Hayes, a weather-beaten man with kind eyes, who shook her hand firmly and said he'd heard good things about her cooking. A young couple with 3 small children who ran the neighboring ranch. An elderly woman who claimed to have the best recipe for preserving tomatoes in the territory. Through it all, Lena smiled and nodded and tried to remember names, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. But nobody asked intrusive questions. Nobody demanded to know where she'd come from or why. They accepted Mara's introduction. "This is Lena. She's cooking for Cal Braddock's ranch," and welcomed her with the easy hospitality of people who understood that in this territory everyone had come from somewhere else, and usually for reasons they didn't discuss. The food was set out on long tables under the open sky, and Lena's contributions disappeared almost immediately. Her pies were gone within 20 minutes, her rolls even faster. She overheard 2 women discussing her spice cake in tones of reverent appreciation, and despite herself, she felt a flush of pride. Owen found her during the meal, dragging her toward a group of children who were playing some complicated game involving a ball and a lot of shrieking. "You have to come meet my friends! I told them all about you!" Lena let herself be pulled along, watching as Owen proudly introduced her to a gaggle of children ranging from about 3 to maybe 10. They stared at her with the frank curiosity of the young, but whatever Owen had told them must have been positive because they accepted her presence without question. "Owen says you make the best biscuits in the whole world," one little girl said seriously. "He might be exaggerating," Lena said. "No, I'm not." Owen was indignant. "They're really that good. Tell her, Miss Lena. Tell her about the secret of steam." So Lena found herself surrounded by children, explaining the basics of baking while they listened with rapt attention. It was so normal, so ordinary, so far removed from running and fear and hiding that she almost couldn't process it. One of the younger children, a boy of maybe 3, climbed into her lap without asking permission, making himself comfortable like he belonged there. Lena froze for just a moment, then carefully adjusted her arms to support him and felt something inside her chest crack wide open. This could have been Sarah, should have been Sarah. Her daughter should be here, climbing into laps and listening to stories and learning to bake. Instead, she was, where? Dead like the Whitmores claimed? Or alive somewhere, growing up without knowing she had a mother who'd never stopped looking for her? The little boy in her lap yawned, pressing his head against her shoulder with the complete trust of a child who'd never learned to be afraid. Lena held him gently and blinked back tears, trying to focus on the present moment instead of all the moments she'd lost. Across the yard, she saw Cal watching her. When their eyes met, he nodded slightly, and she understood. He knew what this was costing her. He knew, and he was proud of her anyway. As the afternoon wore into evening, someone brought out instruments, a fiddle, a guitar, something that might have been a banjo. Music filled the air, lively and infectious, and people began to dance. Lena retreated to the edges, content to watch, but Mara had other ideas. "Oh, no, you don't. You don't get to hide now." Mara grabbed her hand. "Come on, I'll teach you. It's not complicated." "I don't dance. Everyone dances. You just haven't had the right teacher yet." Before Lena could protest further, she was being pulled into the line of dancers, Mara on one side and Mrs. Chen on the other. The dance was simple enough. A few steps forward, a few back, turn your partner, repeat. Lena stumbled at first, hyper-aware of being watched, but the music was infectious and the other dancers were patient. By the 3rd repetition of the pattern, she was actually following along. By the 5th, she was almost smiling. By the 7th, she was laughing, actual, real laughter that bubbled up from somewhere deep and surprised her with its intensity. When had she last laughed? Really laughed? Not the bitter half-sound of dark humor, but genuine joy? She couldn't remember, and that realization made her laugh harder. The dance ended and another began, this one faster. Tommy appeared at her elbow, grinning. "Miss Lena, may I have this dance? I barely survived the last one." "Then this'll be good practice." He offered his hand with exaggerated formality, and despite herself, Lena took it. Tommy was a better dancer than she expected, light on his feet, patient with her mistakes, and enthusiastic enough to make up for her hesitation. He swung her through the steps with cheerful determination, talking the whole time about his plans to open his own bakery someday, maybe in town, maybe on a small homestead of his own. "You could teach me more recipes," he said hopefully. "Build up a real repertoire. People would come from miles around for your bread." "It's your bread now," Lena corrected. "You learned to make it." "But you taught me. That counts for something." When that dance ended, Dutch appeared to claim the next one. Then Marcus, surprisingly graceful for such a gruff man. Then James, who actually smiled at her, a real smile that transformed his whole face. Even Sheriff Hayes asked for a turn, and proved to be an excellent dancer despite his age. Lena was breathless and flushed, and more alive than she'd felt in years when Cal finally cut in. The music had slowed to something gentler, and couples were swaying together in the lantern light that had been strung up as the sun set. "Having a good time?" Cal asked, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers with careful propriety. "I am," Lena admitted. "I didn't think I would, but I am." "Good. You deserve it." Cal guided her through the steps with easy confidence, and Lena realized he was a better dancer than he'd let on. "Half the valley's in love with your cooking, by the way. Mrs. Chen cornered me earlier to ask if you do catering. I have a full-time job." "That's what I told her. She said to let her know if you ever change your mind." Cal was quiet for a moment, then said, "You fit in here, Lena. I hope you can see that. These people, they've accepted you. You're one of them now." Lena looked around at the gathering, the dancing couples, the children playing tag in the growing darkness, the groups of people talking and laughing and sharing food. She'd helped feed them, had contributed something to this moment of community and connection. And they'd welcomed her without demanding her secrets, without judging her for the gaps in her story. Scares me, she said quietly. Belonging. Because it means having something to lose. Everything worth having comes with that risk, Cal said. But the alternative is being alone forever. And that's not really living. That's just surviving. The song ended and another began, but Cal didn't let go of her hand. They stood there in the lantern light, surrounded by music and laughter and the smell of autumn in Montana, and Lena felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. Thank you, she said. For this? For all of it. You don't need to thank me. You earned your place here. Cal squeezed her hand gently, then released it. But you're welcome all the same. Owen found her again as the evening was winding down, sleepy-eyed and dragging his feet. He climbed into her lap without asking, the way he'd done several times throughout the evening, and yawned hugely. Did you have fun, Miss Lena? I did. Thank you for inviting me. You'll come to the next one, right? The Christmas gathering? It's even better than this one. Lena looked down at the child in her lap, at his dark hair so similar to what she remembered of Sarah's, at his complete trust and open affection. I'll come, she heard herself promise, if I'm still here. You'll be here, Owen said with the absolute certainty of childhood. You're not going anywhere. This is your home now. Mara appeared to collect her son, smiling tiredly. Sorry, he's been making himself comfortable all evening. Owen, you can't just claim people. Why not? Owen asked, genuinely confused. Miss Lena doesn't mind. Do you, Miss Lena? Mind, Lena said softly, and realized it was true. She handed Owen back to his mother with reluctance, already missing the warm weight of him. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, everyone pleasantly tired from the evening. Lena sat between Cal and Dutch on the wagon bench, watching the stars wheel overhead in impossible profusion. The vastness of the Montana sky no longer felt threatening. Instead, it felt like possibility, like space to breathe and grow and maybe, just maybe, to heal. Back at the ranch, the men dispersed to their bunks with sleepy goodnights. Cal walked Lena to the kitchen door, paused before heading to the main house. You did good today, he said. Real good. I danced and talked and didn't run away screaming. Low bar. Cal smiled. Higher than you think. Sleep well, Lena. In her small room, Lena changed out of her blue dress and carefully hung it up, already thinking about the next time she might wear it. She pulled out the locket, opened it to Sarah's tiny portrait, and felt the familiar ache tempered now by something new. Not quite hope, but something close to it. I went to a party today, she whispered to the portrait. I danced and laughed and let people see me, and they didn't turn away, they didn't judge, they just accepted me. She traced the edge of Sarah's face with her finger. I don't know if you're out there somewhere, if you're alive, if I'll ever find you, but I'm trying to build something here, something that might be worth having if you ever come home. A place where you'd be safe and loved and surrounded by good people. The portrait didn't answer, but in the quiet of her room, Lena felt a shift inside her, a loosening of the constant vigilance, the permanent tension of being ready to run. Maybe Cal was right. Maybe belonging was worth the risk. Maybe home wasn't just a place you came from, but a place you chose to stay. She closed the locket, held it against her heart for a moment, then tucked it carefully into its hiding place. Tomorrow she'd cook breakfast for 8 hungry men who'd stood between her and danger without hesitation. She'd make Tommy's favorite biscuits and Dutch's preferred coffee, and maybe start planning what to cook for the Christmas gathering Owen had mentioned. Tomorrow she'd keep building this fragile, terrifying, wonderful thing that was starting to feel almost like a life. But tonight, she'd sleep without checking the locks 3 times, without her escape route planned, without her bag packed and ready by the door. Tonight, she'd let herself rest in the knowledge that she was, at least for now, safe. The peace lasted exactly 5 days. Lena was in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, elbow deep in bread dough, when she heard the shouting. Not the usual ranch sounds of men calling to each other across distance, but real anger, the kind that preceded violence. She froze, flour dusting her arms, and listened. I said, get your hands off that, Marcus's voice sharp with fury. I'm just trying to do my job. A younger voice, unfamiliar, defensive. Your job is what Cal tells you, not whatever fool idea got into your head. Lena wiped her hands hastily and moved to the window. In the yard between the barn and the bunkhouse, Marcus had a younger man backed against the fence rail. Someone Lena didn't recognize, maybe 22 or 23, with the kind of cocky posture that suggested he thought he knew more than he did. "There a problem here?" Cal's voice cut across the tension as he emerged from the barn, Dutch close behind. "This is Reed," Marcus said, practically spitting the name. "The new hire you brought in yesterday while we were all in town. He was going through the supplies in the back shed, said he was taking inventory, but he had his hands on equipment that's got nothing to do with ranch work." The young man, Reed, straightened indignantly. "I was just looking around, getting familiar with the place. That's what you're supposed to do when you start somewhere new, right? Not when it involves rifling through things that aren't your concern," Dutch said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. Cal looked between Marcus and Reed, his expression unreadable. "Reed, what exactly were you looking at in that shed?" "Just tools, supplies. I saw some leatherworking equipment and I was curious. Used to do some of that back home, thought maybe I could—" "The shed in question," Marcus interrupted, "is where we keep the good tack and the items we're repairing. New hires don't go poking around in there without permission. Makes people wonder what you're really looking for." The implication hung heavy in the air. Lena's stomach tightened. She knew what Marcus was thinking, that Reed might be connected to the tracker, might be planted here to search for evidence, to confirm she was hiding at the ranch. Reed seemed to catch on to the accusation. His face flushed. "Wait, are you saying I'm some kind of spy? I'm just a ranch hand looking for work. Cal hired me fair and square." "Cal hired you because we're short-handed and you showed up at the right time," James said, appearing from around the corner of the barn. The Wilson brothers flanked Reed now, not quite threatening, but definitely intimidating. "Doesn't mean we trust you yet. Trust gets earned." "This is ridiculous," Reed protested, looking to Cal for support. "Boss, tell them I don't even know what they think I'm doing." Cal studied Reed for a long moment, and Lena could see him weighing options, calculating risks. Finally he spoke, his tone measured and firm. "Reed, you're new here, so let me explain how things work. This ranch operates on trust. The men here, they've been with me for years. They're protective of what's ours, and that includes our people and our privacy. You go nosing around in places without asking. It raises questions." "I didn't mean anything by it," Reed said, but his earlier confidence had deflated. "Maybe you didn't, but intention doesn't matter much when you've got people on edge." Cal crossed his arms. "Here's what's going to happen. You work where you're told, you ask before you explore, and you prove you're here for the right reasons. You do that, we'll get along fine. You keep making people nervous, you'll find yourself looking for work elsewhere. Clear?" "Clear," Reed muttered. "Good. Now get to the north pasture and help Tommy with the fence repairs. Stay there until lunch." Reed left, shoulders tight with resentment, and the remaining men watched him go. When he was out of earshot, Marcus turned to Cal. "You sure about him, boss? Timing's awfully convenient, showing up right after those trackers came through." "I'm not sure about anything," Cal admitted, "but we needed another hand, and turning away everyone who wants work just because we're paranoid isn't sustainable. We'll watch him, keep him away from anything sensitive, see how he handles himself." "And if he's working for them?" Dutch asked quietly. "Then he won't find anything because there's nothing to find." Cal's voice was firm. "As far as anyone can prove, Lena's exactly what she appears to be. A cook we hired off the road who's been nothing but an asset to this ranch." Through the window, Lena felt the weight of those words. Nothing to find, except her locket, her past, the truth of who she was and what she'd done. If Reed really was a plant, if he was searching for evidence, how long before he found something that could be used against her? She returned to her bread dough with shaking hands, trying to focus on the familiar rhythm of kneading, but the peace she'd felt after the harvest supper had evaporated, replaced by the old familiar fear that had kept her running for so long. The rest of the morning passed in tense quiet. Reed worked in the north pasture as ordered, too far away to cause immediate trouble. The other men came and went with unusual vigilance, always aware of where the new hire was, what he was doing. Lena cooked lunch mechanically, her mind only half on the food. When the men came in to eat, Reed among them, the atmosphere in the kitchen was thick with suspicion. Reed sat at the far end of the table, isolated, while the others clustered together. He ate quickly, keeping his eyes on his plate, clearly aware of his pariah status. "This is excellent, Miss Lena," he said, apparently trying to break the ice. "Best meal I've had in months." Lena murmured something non-committal and retreated to the stove. She felt Reed's eyes on her, assessing, and it made her skin crawl. Was he cataloging details to report back? Was he trying to place her face against some description the trackers had provided? "So how long have you been cooking here?" Reed asked, still trying for friendly conversation. "Long enough," Marcus said flatly before Lena could answer. "Why do you care?" "Just making conversation. We're going to be working together, right? Seems like we should get to know each other." "We'll get to know you when you've proven you're worth knowing," James said. "Until then, eat your lunch and keep the questions to yourself." Reed's jaw tightened, but he took the hint. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by the sounds of eating and the occasional muttered request to pass the bread. After the men had gone back to work, Lena stood at the sink washing dishes and trying to steady her breathing. This was it, the beginning of the end. Reed would watch and wait and eventually find something or make something up, and the trackers would return with better evidence, better leverage. She'd have to run again, leave behind everything she'd started to build here. The kitchen door opened and she flinched, but it was only Cal. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. Do you really think he's working for them?" Cal moved to lean against the counter beside her, careful to maintain respectful distance. "I think he's a young man who made a stupid mistake on his first day, but I also think we can't afford to assume he's harmless, so we'll be cautious. This is my fault. I brought danger here, and now everyone's suspicious and tense and—" "Lena." Cal waited until she looked at him. "This isn't your fault. You didn't ask to be hunted. You didn't create the situation that made you run. All you did was try to survive, and there's no shame in that. But the men are protective because they want to be, not because they have to be. There's a difference." He paused, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Can I ask you something?" Lena nodded, bracing herself. "The baby. Sarah. Do you really think she's alive?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Lena gripped the edge of the sink, staring down at the soapy water. "I don't know. Sometimes I'm sure of it. I remember hearing crying the next day, remember Mrs. Whitmore's face when I asked questions, the way she had me locked up instead of just showing me a grave. But other times I think I'm just clinging to hope because the alternative is unbearable." "Have you ever tried to find out for certain?" "How?" "I'm a runaway servant with no money, no connections, no way to investigate. The Whitmores are wealthy, powerful. They control the narrative." Lena's voice broke slightly. "All I have is the locket and the certainty that they're lying about something. Maybe she died later and they didn't want to admit it. Maybe they gave her to someone else and claimed she was dead to avoid scandal. I don't know." Cal was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "After my wife Mary died, I used to talk to her. Stand at her grave and tell her about the ranch, about the things that were happening. People probably thought I was crazy, but it helped. I talk to Sarah sometimes too," Lena admitted, "to her picture in the locket. I tell her about my day, about the people here, about everything, really. It makes her feel less gone." "Then she's not gone," Cal said simply. "Not as long as you carry her with you." Lena turned to look at him, this man who'd lost his own child, who understood grief in a way most people didn't. "Do you ever stop hurting?" "No, but you get better at living around it. The pain becomes part of you instead of all of you." He straightened, moved toward the door. "Keep your head up, Lena. We'll get through this, whatever comes." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Sheriff Hayes, riding in alone and dismounting with the careful movements of someone whose joints didn't work quite like they used to. Cal met him in the yard, and Lena watched from the kitchen window, her heart racing. The two men talked for several minutes, too far away for Lena to hear. The sheriff's posture was relaxed, friendly even, but Lena had learned not to trust appearances. Finally, Cal gestured toward the house, and both men headed for the kitchen. Lena forced herself to stay calm, to keep her hands steady as she poured coffee for both men. Sheriff Hayes settled into a chair at the kitchen table with a grateful sigh. "Miss Lena, I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. Had some business to discuss with Cal. Thought I'd take the opportunity to compliment you on those pies at the harvest supper. My wife's still talking about them." Thank you, Sheriff, Lena managed, setting the coffee cups down carefully. Fact is, Hayes continued, stirring sugar into his coffee, that's partly why I'm here. Had a couple of men come through town yesterday, asking questions. Eastern types, well-dressed, throwing money around. They were asking about a woman matching your description, claiming she's a thief and a runaway. Lena's blood turned to ice. She stood frozen by the stove, unable to speak. Hayes took a sip of coffee, his expression thoughtful. Now, I've been sheriff in this territory for 15 years. I've seen all kinds. Genuine criminals, people running from bad situations, folks just trying to start over. And I've learned to read when something doesn't smell right. What did you tell them? Cal's voice was carefully neutral. Told them I'd seen no one matching that description, which is technically true. The woman they described sounded like a beaten-down thing, scared and desperate. You, Miss Lena, look like a respectable ranch cook who's made friends with half the valley. Hayes smiled slightly. Also told them that if they wanted to conduct official business in my territory, they'd need proper documentation. Montana warrants signed by Montana judges, not whatever Eastern papers they were waving around. Lena finally found her voice. What did they say? Got huffy, threatened to go over my head, mentioned connections and money. I invited them to try and said I'd be happy to explain to any judge why I don't take kindly to hired thugs masquerading as lawmen. Hayes set down his coffee cup. They left, but I don't think they've given up, which is why I'm here, to tell you both to be careful and to let you know that as far as I'm concerned, this is a matter of Eastern rich folks trying to throw their weight around in my territory. I don't take kindly to that. You're saying you're on our side, Cal said. I'm saying I'm on the side of justice, and what these people are doing doesn't smell like justice. It smells like powerful people abusing their power. Hayes looked directly at Lena. I don't know your full story, miss, and I'm not asking for it, but I know Cal Braddock, and if he's standing up for you, that's enough for me. You're part of this community now, and we protect our own. Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes. Thank you, Sheriff. Hayes stood, wincing slightly as his knees protested. Don't thank me yet. Those men will likely be back with different tactics. Keep your eyes open, trust your instincts, and if anything feels wrong, you send word to town immediately. Understood? After the sheriff left, Lena sagged against the counter, the adrenaline draining out of her and leaving her shaky. Cal moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. You see, he said quietly, you've got more people on your side than you realize. Or I've dragged more people into danger. We're grown men and women, Lena. We can make our own choices about what risks we take. Cal touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of comfort. You're not alone in this anymore. The sooner you accept that, the better. That evening, tension simmered through dinner like a physical presence. Reed was still relegated to the far end of the table, still isolated from the rest of the men. He'd worked hard all day, according to Tommy. Hadn't caused any more trouble, but trust wasn't built in a single day of good behavior. Lena was clearing plates when Reed spoke up, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. Look, I know I messed up this morning, I get it. But how long am I supposed to be treated like the enemy? I'm just trying to work, same as all of you. Marcus and James exchanged glances. Dutch studied Reed over his coffee cup. Tommy looked uncomfortable, caught between natural friendliness and loyalty to the group. It was Cal who answered. You want to be trusted? Stop acting like someone who's got something to prove and start acting like someone who's here to work. Do your job, follow instructions, and give it time. Trust isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. I've been doing my job. For one day, James said flatly. Come back in a month and we'll see where things stand. Reed's jaw clenched, but he seemed to recognize the futility of arguing. He stood abruptly, mumbled something about not being hungry, and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the frame, looked back at the table. For what it's worth, I'm not here to cause trouble for anyone, especially not Miss Lena. I don't know what you all think I'm up to, but you're wrong. After he left, the men sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Dutch spoke. He's either genuine and we're being unfair, or he's a good actor. Either way, we can't let our guard down. Agreed, Cal said. Marcus, James, keep rotating watch at night. Nothing obvious, but make sure someone's always awake and aware. Dutch, you keep an eye on him during the day. Tommy, You work with him, but stay alert. What about me? Lena asked quietly. Cal looked at her, his expression serious. You keep doing what you're doing. Cook, maintain your routine, act like nothing's wrong. The more normal everything appears, the less there is for anyone to report back about. If Reed is working for the trackers, we don't want to give him anything useful. That night, Lena lay awake in her small room, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling. She heard someone moving outside. Marcus or James on watch, probably. The knowledge that she was being protected should have been comforting, but instead it made her feel like a burden, like someone who required constant vigilance. She pulled out the locket, opened it in the darkness. She couldn't see Sarah's portrait without lighting the lamp, but she didn't need to. She'd memorized every detail long ago. I'm trying so hard to build something here, she whispered. But I'm scared, baby girl, scared that it's all going to fall apart, that I'm going to have to run again, that I'll never know what happened to you. The locket offered no answers, but holding it brought a measure of comfort. Somewhere out there, maybe Sarah was alive. Maybe she was being raised by people who loved her, who gave her a good life. Or maybe the Whitmores had told the truth, and she died that first night, and Lena was clinging to false hope. Either way, Lena owed it to her daughter's memory to keep fighting. To build a life that would be worthy of Sarah if she ever came home. To become someone who could protect and provide instead of just running and hiding. She closed the locket, tucked it carefully away, and tried to sleep. The next few days passed in watchful tension. Reed worked hard, kept his head down, and gradually the atmosphere began to ease slightly. He was competent with the cattle, good at repairs, willing to take on the dirty jobs without complaint. Tommy reported that he was easy to work with, respectful of boundaries, seemingly genuine in his desire to fit in. But nobody fully relaxed. The men maintained their rotating watch. Lena kept her most precious possessions, the locket, a small amount of money she'd saved, her mother's skillet, in places where she could grab them quickly if needed. Every unfamiliar sound made her tense. Every unexpected visitor set her heart racing. It was Mara who finally broke through the stress. She arrived one afternoon with Owen and a determined expression. You look terrible, she announced, surveying Lena critically. When's the last time you slept properly? I sleep fine. Lena, you have circles under your eyes dark enough to store coal in. You're wound tighter than fence wire. This isn't sustainable. Mara set Owen down with instructions to play quietly, then turned back to Lena. Talk to me. What's really going on? So Lena told her about Reed and the suspicions, about Sheriff Hayes' visit and his warning, about the constant fear that everything was about to collapse. Mara listened without interrupting, her face growing increasingly troubled. This is why I came by, Mara said when Lena finished. I wanted to tell you you're not alone in this. I know the men are watching out for you, but you need women too. People who understand what it's like to be afraid in ways men don't always grasp. I appreciate that, but no buts. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come to my place tomorrow afternoon. Owen and I will teach you to shoot properly. We'll have tea like civilized people, and you're going to talk about something other than fear and danger for a few hours. Understood? Despite everything, Lena felt her lips twitch toward a smile. You're very bossy. Someone has to be. You certainly won't advocate for yourself. Mara softened slightly. Lena, running yourself into the ground doesn't help anyone. You need to take care of yourself too. Owen chose that moment to appear at Lena's elbow, holding up a drawing he'd made. Look, Miss Lena, it's you and me making bread. The picture was crude but recognizable. Two stick figures, one tall and one small, standing beside what might have been a table or possibly a horse. Lena felt her throat tighten. It's beautiful, Owen. You can keep it if you want, to remember that you're my friend. Owen said it with the simple sincerity of childhood, and Lena had to blink hard against sudden tears. Thank you. I'd like that very much. After Mara and Owen left, Lena pinned the drawing to the wall beside her bed, next to the small mirror. It was the first decoration she'd allowed herself since arriving at the ranch, the first acknowledgement that this room was becoming more than just a temporary shelter. That night at dinner, Reed made another attempt at conversation. Miss Lena, I was wondering if you might teach me some cooking basics. Nothing fancy, just enough that I could make myself a decent meal if I'm ever out on the range overnight. The request was reasonable, the tone respectful. Lena glanced at Cal, who gave a slight nod, permission to engage or maybe a test to see how Reed handled himself. I could show you some simple things, Lena said carefully. How to make bannock over a fire, basic bean preparation. When would you want to learn? Whenever you have time, ma'am. I don't want to impose. Tomorrow afternoon, then, after the midday meal. Reed's face lit up. Thank you, Miss Lena. I really appreciate it. After dinner, Dutch pulled Lena aside. You don't have to teach him if you're not comfortable. I know, but Cal's right. If he is working for the trackers, acting normal is our best defense. And if he's genuine, shutting him out indefinitely isn't fair. Lena managed a wry smile. Besides, teaching someone to make bannock isn't exactly revealing state secrets. Fair point. Just be careful. Don't let him ask too many personal questions. The next afternoon, Lena found herself in the kitchen with Reed, showing him the basics of campfire cooking. He was an attentive student, asked good questions, and seemed genuinely interested in learning. As they worked, Lena found herself relaxing slightly. He reminded her of Tommy in some ways, eager, earnest, trying hard to prove himself. Where'd you learn to cook like this? Reed asked, mixing dough for bannock. My mother taught me. She must have been quite a cook. She was. Lena kept her answers short, revealing nothing substantive. Reed seemed to sense the boundary. He changed topics smoothly. I'm sorry about the other day with the shed. I really was just curious, but I understand why it looks suspicious. I've never worked a ranch this size before. I'm still learning what's normal. Where did you work before? Lena asked, then immediately regretted the question. She didn't want to encourage personal revelations that would require reciprocation. Small farm in Wyoming, family operation, just me and my pa and 2 hired men. Pa died last winter. I sold the farm to pay debts, and I've been drifting since. Heard Montana ranches paid decent, so I came north. Reed shaped his bannock carefully. Like this? A bit flatter. It needs to cook through evenly. Lena demonstrated and Reed adjusted his technique. They worked in companionable silence for a while. When the bannock was done and cooling, Reed cleaned up his workspace without being asked. Another point in his favor. Thank you for giving me a chance, he said as he prepared to leave. I know I have to earn everyone's trust, but it helps that you're willing to teach me. Makes me feel a little less like an outsider. After he left, Lena stood in the kitchen and tried to reconcile her instinctive wariness with the evidence in front of her. Reed seemed genuine. He worked hard, showed respect, and was trying to fit in. Maybe the timing of his arrival really was just coincidence. Maybe her paranoia was making her see threats where none existed. Or maybe that was exactly what he wanted her to think. Cal found her there, staring at the cooling bannock with a troubled expression. How'd it go? Fine. He's a good student, seems sincere. Lena turned to face him. I don't know what to think anymore. Is he dangerous? Is he just a young man trying to work? How am I supposed to tell the difference? You listen to your gut, Cal said. What's it telling you? Lena considered. That I want to trust him because it would be easier, but that wanting something doesn't make it true. That's wisdom right there. Cal leaned against the doorframe. Keep your guard up, but don't let fear make you cruel. Reed might be exactly what he appears to be, and freezing him out permanently because we're scared would make us no better than the people you ran from. When did you get so wise? Around the 3rd or 4th time, I made a terrible decision and had to live with the consequences. Cal's mouth quirked. Learn from my mistakes. Sometimes the right thing and the smart thing aren't the same, and you have to choose which one you can live with. That evening, as Lena prepared for bed, she thought about Cal's words. The right thing versus the smart thing. Trusting Reed might not be smart, but completely shutting him out might not be right. She needed to find a balance, a way to protect herself while still being fair. She pulled out Owen's drawing, studied the stick figures making bread together. This was what she was fighting for. Connection, community, the chance to be more than just survival. If she let fear turn her into someone who saw threats everywhere, who trusted no one, she'd lose the very thing that made staying worthwhile. Lena tucked the locket against her heart, turned down the lamp, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow she'd go to Mara's place, or learn to shoot, drink tea, and remember what it felt like to be something other than afraid. Tomorrow, she'd take another step toward building a life, instead of just running from the past. And if Reed was watching, if he was reporting back to the trackers, at least she'd have given them nothing useful. Just a woman cooking and teaching and trying to live quietly on a Montana ranch. Nothing worth hunting, nothing except the truth. The crisis came 3 weeks later, on a morning that started like any other. Lena was making breakfast when she heard the horses, multiple riders coming fast. Her hands stilled on the biscuit dough, flour dusting her arms, and she felt the familiar spike of fear. But when she looked out the window, it wasn't the tracker or his hired men. It was Mara, riding hard with Owen bouncing precariously in front of her, and behind them, Sheriff Hayes with 2 deputies. Something was very wrong. Cal was already striding across the yard when Lena burst through the kitchen door. Mara practically fell off her horse, her face pale and her hands shaking as she handed Owen down to Dutch, who'd appeared from the barn. "They came to my place," Mara gasped out, struggling for breath. "Early this morning, 4 men, maybe 5. They had papers, legal documents claiming Lena stole valuable property and that I was harboring a fugitive by letting her visit. They tried to search my house." Sheriff Hayes dismounted more carefully, his expression grim. Mrs. Bell sent Owen to town for help while she held them off with a rifle. By the time we got there, they'd left, but they made threats. Said they knew where the woman was hiding, that they had proof, and they were coming here next. Lena felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. This was it. They'd found her, they had evidence, and now everyone she cared about was in danger because of her. "How long do we have?" Cal's voice was steady, already moving into action mode. "Maybe an hour, maybe less." Hayes looked at Lena, his expression kind but serious. "Miss, I need to know, what exactly did you take from these people?" Lena's hand moved to her pocket, to the locket hidden there. "A locket. It belonged to my daughter. They took her from me and said she died, but the locket was in her blanket when they carried her away. It's the only proof I have that she existed. And these people, they claim you stole it? They claim I stole silver, but it was never theirs. It was mine from my mother, and I'd put it with Sarah when she was born." Lena's voice cracked. "They're lying about what it is and why I took it." Hayes nodded slowly. "Here's what's going to happen. Those men show up with their papers. I'm going to require they present them to me formally, follow proper procedure. That'll buy us some time. But Lena, if they have documentation that looks legitimate, even if it's false, I may not be able to protect you indefinitely." "I understand." Lena straightened her shoulders, tried to find courage she didn't feel. "I won't let you all get hurt because of me. If they come, I'll go with them. Face whatever charges they're making." "The hell you will," Cal said flatly. "We're not handing you over to people who've been lying from the start." "Cal's right," Mara said, still breathless but fierce. "I didn't hold those men off with a rifle so you could just surrender. We fight this properly." "How?" Lena's voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. "They have money, power, legal documents. What do I have? A locket and a story no one can verify." "You have us," Tommy said, appearing from the bunkhouse with Marcus, James, and Reed behind him. "You have this whole ranch willing to stand up and say you're exactly who you claim to be, a good woman who works hard and never caused a moment of trouble." Even Reed nodded. "I don't know your full story, Miss Lena, but I know you've been nothing but kind to me when you had every reason not to be. That counts for something." Lena looked around at the faces surrounding her, Cal steady and determined, Dutch calm and ready, the Wilson brothers already checking their weapons, Tommy earnest and loyal, Mara fierce despite her fear, even young Reed willing to stand with her. Sheriff Hayes and his deputies formed a wall of official authority, and little Owen watched with wide, trusting eyes from Dutch's arms. These people were willing to fight for her. The realization hit like a physical blow, overwhelming and terrifying and precious beyond measure. "All right," Sheriff Hayes said, taking charge. "Here's the plan. When they arrive, I do the talking. You men stay visible but not aggressive. We want to show strength without giving them an excuse to claim we're violent. Lena, you stay in the kitchen unless I specifically call for you. Mrs. Bell, you and Owen should probably—" "We're staying," Mara said firmly. "Owen's scared, and separating him from the people who make him feel safe right now would be cruel. Besides, I'm not leaving Lena to face this alone." Owen had indeed been crying silently, pressed against Dutch's chest. At the mention of his name, he lifted his head. I want to stay with Miss Lena. Dutch carried him to Lena, who took the child automatically, holding him close. Owen wrapped his arms around her neck and buried his face in her shoulder, and Lena felt something inside her crack wide open. This was what Sarah should have been, a warm, trusting weight in her arms, a child who needed comfort and believed she could provide it. It's all right, sweetheart, she murmured, carrying him toward the house. Everything's going to be all right. She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince Owen or herself. Inside the kitchen, Mara helped Lena settle Owen on the bench near the stove, then immediately began building up the fire. If we're going to wait, we might as well have coffee ready, and maybe... She glanced at Lena with dark humor. Maybe you should finish those biscuits. If we're making a stand, we should at least do it on full stomachs. The absurdity of it, making biscuits while waiting for men who wanted to drag her back to face false charges, made Lena laugh, high and slightly hysterical. But Mara was right. Her hands needed something to do, and cooking had always been her anchor. So she finished the biscuits while Mara made coffee and Owen watched with solemn eyes, and they waited. The men came an hour later, just as Sheriff Hayes had predicted. 6 riders this time, including the tracker Lena recognized from before. They rode up to the ranch house with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from believing the law was on their side. Through the kitchen window, Lena watched Sheriff Hayes step forward to meet them, his deputies flanking him. Cal and his men formed a second line, not threatening but unmistakably present. "Gentlemen," Hayes called out, "this is private property. State your business." The tracker dismounted, producing papers from his saddlebag with a flourish. "We have a legal warrant for the arrest of one Lena Hawthorne, wanted for theft of valuable property from the Whitmore household in Philadelphia. We have testimony that she's been harboring here, and we're authorized to search the premises and take her into custody." "Let me see those papers," Hayes said, moving forward with his hand outstretched. The tracker hesitated, then handed them over. Hayes read slowly, deliberately, while tension thickened in the yard. Finally, he looked up. "These papers are signed by a magistrate in Pennsylvania. They have no legal standing in Montana territory without being properly filed through our court system. We were told..." "I don't care what you were told. This is my jurisdiction, and in my jurisdiction we follow proper procedure." Hayes handed the papers back. "You want to arrest someone here? You file your warrant through the territorial court in Helena, get it signed by a Montana judge, and bring it back. Until then, you have no authority here." One of the other men, older and better dressed than the tracker, urged his horse forward. "Sheriff, we're not trying to circumvent the law, but this woman is a thief and a fugitive. The Whitmore family has significant influence, and they will not take kindly to local officials obstructing justice." "Is that a threat?" Cal's voice cut across the yard, cold as winter. "It's a statement of fact," the well-dressed man said smoothly. "The Whitmores have resources and connections that extend far beyond Pennsylvania. It would be in everyone's best interest to cooperate." "Here's a fact for you," Sheriff Hayes said. "I've been lawman in this territory for 15 years. I've dealt with cattle rustlers, claim jumpers, confidence men, and every variety of troublemaker you can imagine. And not once have I let rich Eastern money tell me how to do my job. You want to make legal accusations against someone in my jurisdiction, you follow Montana law. Otherwise, you can ride back to wherever you came from and tell the Whitmores that their money doesn't spend here." The tracker's face went red with frustration. "You're protecting a criminal." "I'm protecting due process," Hayes corrected. "Now, unless you have actual Montana-authorized paperwork, I suggest you move along before I decide you're harassing law-abiding citizens and arrest you instead." Inside the kitchen, Lena held her breath. This was the moment. Either the men would back down, or things would turn violent. She felt Owen trembling against her and held him tighter. The well-dressed man studied the scene, Sheriff Hayes and his armed deputies, Cal and the ranch hands clearly ready to back the sheriff's play, the complete lack of fear or deference from anyone present. Whatever calculation he was making, he seemed to reach a conclusion. "Very well, Sheriff. We'll pursue proper legal channels, but I assure you, we will be back with appropriate documentation, and when we return, there will be consequences for this obstruction." "I look forward to examining your properly filed paperwork," Hayes said mildly. "Until then, safe travels." The men left, though their departure was full of barely contained rage. Lena watched them disappear down the road, her heart still hammering, hardly daring to believe they'd actually left. Sheriff Hayes came into the kitchen a few minutes later, accepting the coffee Mara poured for him with a grateful nod. That bought us time, but not much. Maybe a week or two while they go through proper channels, or while they try to find a Montana official they can bribe or intimidate into signing their warrant. Will they succeed? Lena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Depends on who they approach. Most judges I know don't take kindly to being pressured by outsiders. But money talks, and the Whitmores clearly have plenty of it. Hayes took a sip of coffee. Miss Lena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Lena nodded, bracing herself. Is there any truth at all to their claims? Did you take anything that could legitimately be called theft? I took the locket. It was mine, given to me by my mother, but I'd placed it with my daughter when she was born. When they took Sarah away and claimed she'd died, the locket was gone too. 2 weeks later, I saw it in Mrs. Whitmore's jewelry box. She claimed she'd found it among the household items, that it clearly belonged to the family's collection. Lena's hands clenched. I waited until she was out, took it back, and ran. So yes, I took property from their house. But it was mine to begin with. Can you prove it was yours? My mother's initials are engraved inside the back of the casing. EMH. Elizabeth Marie Hawthorne. She gave it to me before she died. Lena pulled out the locket, opened it to show not just Sarah's portrait, but the faint engraving on the interior back. How would the Whitmores explain their family heirloom having my mother's initials? Hayes examined the locket carefully. This could help. If it came to a trial, this would be evidence in your favor. But trials cost money, require lawyers, take time you may not have. He handed the locket back gently. I'm going to be straight with you. Your best defense isn't legal, it's practical. You need to become so integrated into this community that removing you becomes more trouble than it's worth. I don't understand, Lena said. People protect their own, Cal said, his voice certain. You're not just some stranger anymore. You're the cook who feeds half the ranch hands in the valley when we gather for brandings. You're the woman who taught Tommy to bake bread and made Mrs. Chen's store profitable by actually knowing how to use the supplies she sells. You're Mara's friend and Owen's... He glanced at the boy still clinging to Lena. Well, apparently you're very important to Owen. I love Miss Lena, Owen said simply, his voice muffled against her shoulder. She's nice to me, and she teaches me things, and she doesn't get mad when I ask too many questions. Mara's eyes went suspiciously bright. See? You're family now, whether you plan to be or not. And families fight for each other. So what do we do? Lena asked, looking around at the faces surrounding her, all these people who'd somehow become hers without her quite noticing. Sheriff Hayes set down his coffee cup. We make it crystal clear that you're a valued member of this community. I'll spread the word among the other ranchers, the business owners, anyone with influence. When those men come back with their warrant, they'll find a whole territory standing between them and you. And if they want to force the issue, well, Montana justice tends to side with locals over outsiders, especially when the locals are united. That's a lot to ask of people, Lena said quietly. You're not asking, Dutch said from the doorway. We're offering. There's a difference. Over the next week, Lena watched in amazement as the community mobilized around her. Mrs. Chen spread the word through her store, and suddenly Lena had people she'd barely met stopping by to introduce themselves, to make sure she knew she was welcome. Other ranchers came by to discuss business with Cal, but really to size up the situation and pledge their support. Mara organized a quilting circle at her house and invited Lena, who found herself surrounded by a dozen women all armed with needles and fierce loyalty to their own. Anyone tries to drag you out of this territory, they'll have to go through all of us, declared Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who ran a boarding house in town. And I've got a shotgun older than half the men in this valley that still shoots straight. The other women murmured agreement, and Lena felt overwhelmed by their acceptance, their willingness to stand with someone they barely knew, based solely on the fact that she was one of them now. Reed proved his worth during this time too, working double shifts without complaint so the other men could attend community meetings. He pulled Lena aside one evening with an awkward expression. Miss Lena, I need to confess something. When I first got hired, I did ask around about you. In town, I mean. I'd heard the men talking about some trouble, and I wanted to know what I was getting into. Lena's stomach dropped. And? And everyone I talked to told me you were a good woman who'd had some bad luck, that you worked hard, kept to yourself, and made the best biscuits in the territory. Nobody had anything bad to say about you. Not one person. Reed met her eyes. I should have just asked directly instead of going behind your back. I'm sorry. What changed your mind? About me, I mean. Reed smiled slightly. You taught me to cook. You didn't have to. You could have refused, could have kept treating me like a threat. But you gave me a chance anyway. That told me more about your character than any amount of asking around could have. The second confrontation came on a cold morning 2 weeks later. This time the tracker brought not just papers but a federal marshal from Helena, a stern-faced man named Carver, who clearly didn't appreciate being dragged into what he considered a petty dispute. Sheriff Hayes met them at the edge of town, requiring them to present their warrant officially before proceeding. Lena waited at the ranch with Cal and the others, her hands steady as she cooked breakfast, but her mind racing with possibilities. When Hayes returned several hours later, his expression was carefully neutral. They have a warrant, properly filed and signed. I can't stop them from coming here, and I can't prevent them from taking you if they can positively identify you and if the warrant is executed properly. Then it's over, Lena said quietly. Not necessarily. Hayes pulled out a chair, sat down heavily. Marshal Carver is a fair man, and he's not pleased about being pulled into what looks like a rich family using the legal system for personal revenge. He's agreed to conduct the arrest at the courthouse in town tomorrow at noon, in public, where everything can be done by the book. That gives us tonight to prepare. Prepare how? Cal demanded. Prepare a defense, prepare witnesses, prepare evidence that Lena is exactly who we've said she is, a woman who fled a bad situation, took only what was rightfully hers, and has been nothing but an asset to this community. Hayes looked at Lena. You're going to have to tell your full story tomorrow, in front of the marshal and anyone else who shows up. No more hiding, no more partial truths. Everything. Terror clawed at Lena's throat. If I tell them about Sarah, about the Whitmores, they'll use it against me. They'll say I'm an unfit mother, that I'm mentally unstable, or they'll see a woman who fought to keep a piece of her child after powerful people took everything else from her, Mara said fiercely. Lena, you can't keep running from your truth. It's time to stand and fight. That night, the kitchen became a war room. Lena told her full story to Cal, Hayes, Mara, and Dutch. Everything she'd been holding back, all the details she'd been too afraid to share. The pregnancy that had cost her position in the household. The master's son who'd forced himself on her and then claimed she'd seduced him. The birth in a cold room with only an indifferent midwife present. The 3 hours of holding Sarah before they took her away. The sound of crying the next day that convinced her the baby was alive. Mrs. Whitmore's cold insistence that the child had died and been buried already. The locket appearing in the jewelry box 2 weeks later. The desperate theft and flight that had brought her here. By the time she finished, she was shaking, tears streaming down her face. Cal's expression was murderous. Mara was crying openly. Dutch looked like he wanted to ride to Philadelphia and commit violence. Even Sheriff Hayes, who'd probably heard every variety of terrible story, seemed shaken. Those bastards, Cal said finally, his voice rough. Those absolute bastards. The question is how to prove it, Hayes said. Lena, is there anyone who might corroborate your story? Anyone from the Whitmore household who saw what happened? Lena thought desperately. There was another servant, Hannah. She was there when I gave birth, helped the midwife. She knew I'd had a baby, but she was terrified of the Whitmores. I doubt she'd testify against them. Anyone else? The midwife, maybe, but she was paid by the Whitmores. She'd never admit the baby lived. Lena felt hope draining away. It's my word against theirs, and they have money and power, and I have nothing. You have us, Cal said firmly, and you have that locket with your mother's initials proving it was yours. And you have an entire community willing to testify that you're a good, honest woman who wouldn't lie about something like this. Is it enough? Lena asked Hayes. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. But it's what we've got, so we make it count. The courthouse the next day was packed. Word had spread through the territory, and it seemed like half the valley had shown up. Ranchers, shopkeepers, families with children, elderly folks who could barely make the journey. They filled the small courthouse and spilled out into the street, a wall of witness to whatever was about to happen. Lena walked in flanked by Cal and Sheriff Hayes, her head high despite the terror coursing through her veins. She wore her blue dress, the one she'd made for the harvest supper, and she carried her mother's locket in her pocket like a talisman. The tracker was already there with the well-dressed man from before, who introduced himself as Mr. Whitmore's attorney. Marshal Carver sat at the judge's bench, looking stern and impatient. "Let's get this over with," Carver said. "Mr. Pemberton, you're claiming this woman stole property from your clients. Present your evidence." The attorney stood, launching into a prepared speech about Lena's theft of a valuable silver locket, her flight from justice, her deception in hiding at the Braddock Ranch. He painted her as a criminal and a liar, someone who'd betrayed the trust of the kind family that had employed her. Lena listened with mounting anger, her hands clenched in her lap. When Pemberton finally finished, Marshal Carver turned to her. "Miss Hawthorne, do you have a response to these charges?" Lena stood, her legs shaky but her voice steady. "Yes, sir. I took the locket from the Whitmore house, that's true. But it was mine to begin with. My mother gave it to me before she died, and I placed it with my